Good morning, everybody. Welcome in this cheery sounds around to this last meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee for this municipal year. I just remind people it's an open meeting and we're being recorded. And do we have any declarations of interest? Yeah. I'm skipping it. Right, the apologies. We've got apologies in masses of apologies from the top team of officers because this is half term and they're trying to use up their leave before this election comes, and they probably have to work hard with whoever the new mayor will be. But we are surrounded by, I think they've come out to play because the buses are away, a lot of the officers, and we've got Robin in. We had apologies from Councillor Todd Jones and Councillor Smart there, and we're joined by Councillor Bridget Smith when we get on to the deep dive into environment, climate change, and that sort of thing. Okay, I should say that the office. Sorry.
All thing, Chair, but I mean, I appreciate not everyone has children, but does the combined authority not avoid half terms and such like? I know in the City Council in Cambridge we had a chat about that and decided to positively avoid them really with meetings.
I'm blind on those matters because I don't have any children, and I accept the dates that we all agreed way back. But I think it's a useful reminder that we've got a list of dates for the next municipal year. We could ask us to cross-check. We don't.
Yeah, can I borrow your mic?
Yes, please.
Just to remind members that this meeting was originally scheduled for next week and it was moved forward to because of the external audit item. We do normally try to.
Okay, any more fast balls? Probably move on. Okay, so I've got a few announcements. We had a recruitment panel last week for another independent member because my term finishes in this municipal year. And I'm able to report back that we chose someone with an extensive background in chairing as well as in audit committees, and he's been on the audit committee of a combined authority in Yorkshire and has other chairing skills. So we decided that that officers will recommend to the CA board and the AGM that he be appointed both as an independent member and as the new chair of the committee. But there's a sort of limbo land because I think the AGM is June, so it's not ratified until then. But we had a good range of candidates, and it was interesting to see that this activity in life areas is attracting interest from people in the community. Number two, we have had two meetings of the. Sorry, yes. Yep. Yes, you're on.
Sorry, that's a question that just sort of leapt into mind. Firstly, I've had great pleasure working with you over the years. I know it's your last meeting. Thank you for that. But do you stay in post until June?
No,
in case something comes up.
No, I think that's the term finishes at the end of the municipal year. So there is this interregnum. I can't imagine anything in our business is that urgent that we need it between the 1st of May and whenever it is of June. But perhaps we just note that for the record, and the officers can think about that as to where that leaves them if they don't have a blessed chair or blessed chair of the committee for a month. Okay. We've had, and since the last meeting, I just want to report back that we've had two hearing panels as part of the Audit and Governance Committee subcommittee, and the decision notices from those panels are appended the minutes in the papers today. And I'd just like to thank those colleagues who joined me on the panel. It's a challenging process, but it was everybody engaged, and I'm very grateful for the support because it's not an easy thing to have to do. Thank you.
I don't know whether it's appropriate to raise it now or later, but have we had any response from Fenland in response to Councillor Tierney? Have they agreed that he would be inappropriate to be the audit and scrutiny person?
Look for advice, but I don't think it's been to the board yet because it has to go to the CA board. They must consider the recommendations of the panel, and they would need to decide whether to approach Fenland.
So my next question was, has Councillor Bailey apologised to the mayor? And because the recommendation was should consider apologising.
Yes, she's indicated that she doesn't intend.
Okay, so will that also be reported to the board?
No, the decision notice was that we've published the decision of the subcommittee. And so it is published, it's on the website, but the subcommittee did not deem it necessary to recommend that it go to the board, which was another option that was available. Okay, Gary. Yes, you're on now.
Yeah. Yeah, related to that as well, I think I did write to you, JP, about it. I was disappointed that the sort of level of contact with Councillor Tierney, and would have expected or hoped that as the Fenland representative on the committee here, that I could have actually helped and been contacted to see if I could have made contact with Councillor Tierney. Obviously, it sounds like, it looks like there were potentially technical reasons why he hadn't responded. But I was just sort of disappointed that I said as the Fenland representative on this committee that I could have interjected, and maybe, and I would have done that for anybody on Fenland, regardless of the party as well.
It's a bit tricky to go into the detail, but I understand you approached the monitoring officer and he would have given you an answer to that question. My personal view is councillors do council business, they have council websites, and it isn't, I don't think I would have expected officers to go hunting round to find somebody, but I'm not privy to what went on. But and thank you for your note, but I think that's enough appropriately said for the moment. It's fun, my last meeting. Right, we have a humongous agenda, and I'm told there's lunch around 12 o'clock. We did agree at our last meeting so that we would take everything today and not leave it until the next municipal year. So the speed of advance and whether lunch is an end stop or a waypoint depends on the nature of the discussions that we have. So it's in your good hands. Thank you. Okay, so item 4, the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of November. Are there any comments on it as a record? Are we happy to take them? I see that as a yes. Will we just go then to the action log? Is there anything to be said about that? I think in the action log there's sort of duplicate items which we might as well tidy up. Both the two items referring to the decision which we put into next year as to the appropriateness or otherwise of the accounts being signed off by the board. Could you just make that a single item for the work plan as we go ahead? Because I think it puts it in the work. Thank you very much. Okay. So.
On page 6, which is the minutes of the last meeting, which I don't think is in the actions of the current action log, it talks about officers could look to make it, which is the policy and reference to ex-employees and members and confidential information, and whether it was explicit enough. Officers responded to say that they could look to make it more explicit. without actually saying it will be made more explicit, and if so, when and how. So I'm just conscious that this is the end of the municipal year and we might lose it if we
Sorry,
don't
could you just
consider it. So
say which paragraph?
page 6, on paragraph 6 towards the end.
Oh, okay, it's your page 6 on the. Yes, I got it now.
Page is that? Yeah, on page 6.
Okay, yes, that's a good, very good. Thank you very much, Graham. So have you got that? To carry that into the action log.
And then I think there's one on related to page one of the actions from July, which was down to Rob on page 9, about the responsibility of the board to note rather than approve the statement of accounts.
No, well, that was the.
Sorry, so is that the same comment? Because that seemed, July 24 seems to be like 6 months away, and I would have expected Rob to have decided that fairly quickly, knowing him.
No, we took the discussion to definitely kick it into next year, because there's a range of views as to who should sign the accounts. It's the only approval item that we have in our terms of reference, and I think the debate will come between: do you want the people who've gone through done the hard lifting to sign the accounts, or do you send it up to somebody who hasn't done the hard lifting and they do it in a protocol way? And we did just say that we were happy to leave it next year. I think it's in the right place now, but that's not everybody's view.
We could specifically include it when the draft accounts are brought to the committee in the new year, because the draft accounts do come to the committee. That could be part of the discussion there.
In the June meeting.
I believe it's on the June agenda.
Okay, well, let's do that. I mean, I'm grateful for that, because it is important. It's always important that we don't lose sight of stuff that's in these. How many pages have we got today? 438 pages. Okay, anything else on the minutes of the action? No, thanks, Graham. Nathan? No, Nathan, I couldn't see you. Welcome, Nathan. So Nathan is going to present the report, the corporate risk register, and Councillor Smith is with us for the deep dive. We are asked to endorse the register, to do the deep dive and give comments, and to look at the schedule of deep dives for next year. The floor is yours, Nathan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. So the first recommendation is to endorse the corporate risk register dashboard and heat map for February 2025. So there are still 14 corporate risks on the register. We've got 1 very high risk, 2 amber high, 9 yellow medium, and 2 green low. So the 1 very high risk is still future funding. All risks have again been reviewed with the leads in advance of this and at the corporate management team meeting most recently on the 28th of January. So following the December committee, there have been some changes just following your feedback. So the risk titles and descriptions are now more detailed. It's now clearer what each of the risks are. The equalities legislation non-compliance risk, which was formerly called EQIA, those controls have been reworded based on your feedback. The University of Peterborough future expansion feedback has been noted, and the responsible owner continues to work closely with PCC to mitigate those risks. And the climate change risk has been reviewed in advance of this deep dive. Appendix D has been drafted to include the requested information, such as on key KPIs and roles and responsibilities. So for more information, please see Appendix A for the risk register, Appendix B for the risk dashboard, which shows the risk by category, proximity score, and corporate objective, and Appendix C for the risk heat map. I'll skip recommendation B just for a moment. So on to recommendation C. So this is the proposed 2025-26 schedule of deep dives. So please see 2.3 for what we're proposing for the next financial year. This is draft and may change as the corporate risk register is reviewed, and members can suggest changes to the schedule and propose additions as required. So on to recommendation B. So this is the deep dive for climate change.
Stop there,
Shall I
Nathan.
pause that? Yeah.
This bit is a two-part harmony before we get into the climate change issues. Firstly, then, comments on either of those, the risk register or the future deep dives.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just on the risk register, and I don't have an answer to this myself, but I wonder whether there should be something on there about local government review, move to unitary authorities, etc., because it's going to have significant implications to CPCA, I would have thought.
Nathan?
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah, so yeah, I heard the question. Thank you. Obviously, it's not my decision what goes onto the corporate risk register, but I'm very happy to take that away, have discussions with our corporate management team. We meet monthly. So at the next meeting, it's the first thing I'll raise with them and suggest that audit and governance suggested we could add something on that and take that away and see if that gets included. But we'll feed that back to you.
Yeah, and it seems to me, thank you for raising it. I mean, it's the relationships between the constituent councils in the future and whatever they are, which will be the area of particular focus, I would think. So that's please, thank you. Paul, then Chris.
I was going to raise exactly the same point because I was surprised not to see it on here. I know that the CPCA may not be facing the same existential threat that the individual councils are facing, but nevertheless, it should be on here because my understanding of the white paper is that whereas strategic authority should continue to exist, there are a number of issues arising from local government review that need to be looked at because the boundaries of the strategic authority might change depending on how the unitaries pan out at the lower level. And B, the role and responsibilities of the CPCA may change because the interaction of strategic services is there. And those are the things that need to be definitely included in the risk register because it will have an impact on the future operation of the CPCA and it will have an impact on resources as well. So whilst it doesn't need to have a 5 top layer of impact that it has on the risk registers of component authorities, it does need to be at least at the next level down, and it is a high risk, and the likelihood is high. There is no avoiding that.
Thank you, Paul. There's an answer here before we get into it.
Yes, it was really just to agree with the members' views.
You want to lean it forward?
Yeah.
As
As recognised, it's not the same existential risk as it is to our constituent authorities. And then the impact is recognised as part of the medium-term financial plan. The chief exec has got delegated budget and responsibilities to ensure that we are monitoring that, particularly the change to an established mayoral combined strategic authority over the next couple of years. And there are some significant changes to our potential powers. So that is definitely a work kicked off over the next year, 2 years. So I have no doubt it will appear on the risk register, and I can see Judith. So.
Thank you. Just to add to what Rob was just saying, I can confirm as a member of the corporate management team that Rob Bridge, as the chief exec, has established a working group across that is led by himself to meet on all the implications for the combined authority of the English devolution white paper. There's 8 work streams, so that's picking up both issues around the way we work and capacity and relationships, as well as specific topic areas such as transport, climate and the environment, strategic planning and those areas. So I think we've quite rightly identified that we need to take that into the risk register, but I can confirm that those systems and processes are in place and that group is meeting fortnightly with work stream leads to oversee all of that. So hopefully that provides reassurance and we can then embed that into the risk register. Thank you.
Before I go to Jeff, I think it's a very good example, though, of the dynamics of risk registers and what in the real world. You know, it's on the risk registers what you're doing in the real world. You've got somebody like Nathan in the team doing the process, making sure that people are thinking about it, but that is a necessary mechanical thing. I think it's a reminder that particularly top management have to think, yeah, this needs to be there, because if you don't reflect these risks, then How does the team generally know? So you can never win on risk registers. The fact we could talk about it like this is the strength. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, on a similar theme, local government reorganisation is sort of one of the things that's flowed from the change of administration in Westminster, but also a huge number of other policy initiatives. I mean, I'm thinking one that would relate to the deep dive, but we've got the consultation on land use framework and the strategic spatial energy plan, clean energy 2030. All of these things really constitute quite a major shift in the sort of national political or national policy environment, if you like. And I wondered if that itself constitutes some kind of risk which should be in the register, because it might sort of upset or change the plans that we're assessing in the risk register and cause for some, rewriting of what we had planned to do in the context of the new environment.
Thank you. And certainly that is something that is, again, very much at the forefront of the minds of the corporate management team, who are regularly meeting to kind of consider the changes that seem to be upon us on a weekly, if not daily basis at the moment. But again, I think to sort of bear out the point that the chair's just made, what we probably need to do is make sure that that's properly and adequately captured in the risk register, in terms of that sort of making sure that we've embedded that horizon scanning into what's happening, and then make sure we have the resources in the right place to be able to mitigate that change. So I think that's really helpful, and we can also take that back to the corporate management team for further discussion.
Thanks very much. You've got those.
Thank you, Chair. Wanted to agree with what colleagues have said about the devolution changes. I think it's important that's included. Interestingly, I raised this at Peterborough City Council, and both the leader and chief executive said they weren't going to put it on the risk register because they saw it as an opportunity. So we'll see if they are right.
Well, that just means it's green.
Yeah. But as I say, it's uncertainty for all of us, because even though Peterborough is a unitary, we're still expecting changes. So we don't know what they're going to look like. But also I wanted to, just to note my thanks for incorporating the comments from the previous meeting about University of Peterborough expansion, and for actioning those. So thank you very much.
So that was the register itself. We have a programme of deep dives for next year. Are we happy to go with the proposals from the officers?
If I can, Chair, can I just say on table on 2.3, which I'm happy to accept, would it be possible for details of internal audit work in these areas to be added as well, so that when we look at the deep dives, we're aware of when that subject area was last looked, and internal audits review of the effectiveness of the controls in place?
Yeah, we can link internal audit action findings to risks. It's something that we actively do, and it's something that we can start reporting on more and show how each risk links to what internal audit have found within that respective category. Thanks. That's really helpful.
Thank you, Nathan. Another one?
If I can, Chair, can I go on to page 39, please? And the new risk that's been added about the delay to the implementation of mayoral preset bus routes. There's no financial risk recorded against this, but presumably there must be one. And is it at such a scale that it either wants including within this risk, or as a new risk, either on this register or another one?
So may well need to pass over to Judith on this. The result of what's happened with the procurement is that the implementation of those routes has been delayed. The routes themselves, by nature of being funded by the combined authority, are subsidised. So actually, the delay is a financial benefit to the combined authority, in that its costs we won't be incurring until those re-procurements are complete in, I believe, May/June. So it's an event that's already happened rather than a risk that's upcoming. And from a financial perspective, it's actually a reduction in expenditure rather than a risk.
Okay, if I can, Chair. So are you saying in effect then that just because there's been a delay in procurement, the combined authority in future we'll be having no financial risk attached to bus franchising? Because that's in effect my question. The question's about, does bus franchising bring an additional financial risk to the authority? And if so, how big is it and where is it reflected in a risk register?
Please, yeah.
Sorry, the procurement that's been delayed, I may have misunderstood which procurement we're referring to. I believe, yes, mayoral preset bus routes. Those are the current ones that were due for implementation this year, not related to the franchise network, which isn't due to come in until 2026-27. So my answer was specifically about the routes that were procured this year and need re-procurement coming through in May, June 2025. There are significant financial risks associated with bus franchising, and predominantly the fact that we take on the revenue risk of those operations from 26-27. And the risk for bus franchising is on here, although I believe it currently focuses on judicial review of the decision, as that's the most imminent risk associated with the franchise network, because the decision was only recently made. I would expect that risk to be expanded on as we move forward into the actual control of the network over the next couple of years, and those financial risks become real effectively. Because as of today, the network is still deregulated, so we haven't taken on those financial risks yet, but we will in circa 2 years.
Did you want to say something, Judith?
Yes, I was just going to add from a kind of delivery point of view, because obviously Rob very ably has worked with us on the financial side of bus delivery, and from a kind of perspective of the bus services themselves. As this committee is aware, there was an issue that was reported in January regarding the bus procurements on a number of the Tiger routes, and that re-procurement is now underway, and that is the risk that is highlighted here. In terms of the bus franchising, that is separately handled within the risk register. And obviously now that there has been a mayoral decision to go ahead with franchising, we are now working on the implementation planning of that. Once again, we have 8 work streams that are moving forward, and that will be reported through the Transport and Infrastructure Committee and up to the board as we develop those implementation strands. Obviously, the risk management during that process will be critical, as indeed will the financial planning and the mitigation of any of those risks, and indeed any financial risks. And we'll be working incredibly closely with Rob and his team to ensure that happens. There was a discussion at the board on the 6th of February about the importance of reporting of the risks and the decision making that needs to be taken underneath the kind of umbrella decision to franchise, because there's lots of things that now need to be decided and put in place in order to enable the authority to go out to tender for the bus routes and deliver those bus services. And just for clarity, we're looking at going live on those routes in the autumn of 2027, so it'll be the 27-28 financial year rather than as early as 26-27. But hopefully that just provides the reassurance that risk is at the heart of that, and I'm sure in a future audit and governance committee that might well be an area that you want to look into as we move forward with that implementation. I hope that's helpful, just to add to all the information that Rob provided.
Thank you, Judith. And I think we haven't already asked at our last meeting that franchising be a big item for our next year's work.
Can I just come back, please, then, and ask when's so risk talks about judicial review. When's the sort of deadline for that closing, or is it forever open?
No, it isn't forever open. I'm sure that Rena will be better placed than I, as the Deputy Monitoring Officer, to ask for that. But obviously there has been the mayoral decision, I think, was formally taken on the 7th of February, and then there is a period, I understand, of 6 weeks in which a judicial review, you can ask for leave for the judicial review. So there is that process. Obviously, as well, there's a call-in period that overview and scrutiny that has now passed, but the judicial review process, perhaps I will ask the monitoring officer just to provide some advice on that. Thank you.
That you've covered it is actually 3 months from the date of the decision. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
So some members won't agree, Chair, and maybe slightly left to centre a comment, but in terms of the last of those in 2.3, climate change, it seems to me that a risk is Paul Briscoe being elected, as when he was an MP, he generally voted against measures to prevent climate change in Parliament. So there you go.
Okay, I note your comment. Are we happy to, sorry, to Paul, yes.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to be unhappy in terms of the risk register and on the bus franchising issue. So not the franchising issue, the mayoral preset bus route. I'm a little disappointed in the way that this is couched in terms of the effect, because it appears to me that it's looking very short-sighted. It's just looking at what is the impact now as what is the future impacts, because it talks about budget may not be spent this financial year if contract is not put in place. That is less of a risk to the authority as to the reputational risk to the authority of failing to do what it said it would do, and the impact beyond the end of this financial year, because when are these routes going to be put in place? And it seems to me that the way that this register is produced and the way that some of the causes and effects are couched is they're looking purely at the internal processes of the authority rather than the effect of the lack of progress on these matters. And I think there needs to be more recognition that the risks to the authority aren't just financial risks, they are reputational risks and there are operational risks, because if the mayoral preset routes aren't going to be implemented until sometime in the next fiscal year, and we don't know that they will be because we don't know whether the contractual and procurement issues will have been resolved then, do they then run into the franchising risks and how they interact with those risks? That's not hit clear here. And I think that rather than simply approaching this as a checklist of ticking off financial things, what's happening this year, there needs to be more holistic approach to these risks to understand the full impact of the risks and where they fall. It isn't just a question of, are we going to end up spending a little bit more money? What is the effect on the services provided by the combined authority? What is the effect on the reputation of the combined authority? And are we actually going to deliver what the combined authority has said it's going to deliver? I'm not talking about us providing it, but the combined authority can't just simply make a policy announcement, stick it on the risk register, and then fail to deliver it and say, well, that was a risk, but we saved some money. That's not the point.
I don't think that's an interpretation of what the man on my left said, but we are very mature now as an organisation. When we started this journey, when I started this journey, trying to get anybody to say anything about the risk register was like pulling hen's teeth. And I think it's really good that it's the other way around now. But rather, we're conscious of time. I think the general point of reputational risk and perhaps just a health check across the board as to whether that is appropriately reflected by management would be a helpful thing. Are you happy with that, Paul? Right. Okay. The third time of asking, are we happy with the list of deep dives that are put forward to us? Do we all nod? We don't. No, we don't. No.
Sorry, I'm happy with the list, but the new committee in July might or might not decide that it actually wants to look at different things. So if we were saying we were minded to recommend this list, that's fine.
To the next year's.
Correct.
All right, okay. No, that's fine. Leaving this scene, you should never preset the environment for the next lot. Right, okay. With that addition, can we move on now to the deep dive on environment and climate change? And how are we going to do this? Okay, I think you can take, we've read it. So it's more about what it means.
Excellent. Am I on? Yes, I'm on. Thank you.
You just need to be a bit closer to you.
A bit closer.
Probably better.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm joined obviously by Councillor Bridget Smith, who chairs the Environment and Sustainable Communities Committee, and also by Adrian Cannard, who's the Strategic Planning Manager, as well as Nathan, who obviously we work with very closely in terms of risk management. So I just wanted to say a few words of introduction before obviously taking your questions. I think the climate risk is a very interesting risk and probably quite different to some of the other areas that we work in, because CPCA has a strategic and convening role and some delivery functions with regards to climate and impact. But of course, the issue, the cause of climate and environmental issues are far broader, both international, national and local. And what we're attempting to do is obviously to work cohesively with the wider partnerships to adapt to the impacts of climate change, to mitigate the impacts of climate change, but recognising that we are one player in a multitude of players, but a player that is responsible for economic growth and the transport authority and passenger transport authority. So we do have some particular areas of focus. And as part of that convening role, obviously developing the evidence base is critical. You can see in the risk scores that we have a very high inherent score and residual and target scores that aren't that much lower. And I think that reflects the role that we have, which is really quite small, given the very significant threats. And what we've done in the paper is set out the strategic areas where we work together to develop the evidence base and set some strategy, both ourselves and with other colleague partners. And we, for instance, highlighted the environment principles with the Oxcam partnership. We've highlighted the governance that we have through the Environment Sustainable Communities Committee, but also the other organisations that we're part of and the reporting that we do. We've also highlighted the delivery, so the climate action plan that we have, and then the delivery that takes place under that, using the funds available, both capital and revenue, and how they go through the single assurance framework to make sure that they are robust in terms of the processes that they've been through and offer value for money. And then obviously we highlight some of the reporting that we do through the KPIs and the performance management dashboard that we do. So hopefully there is an overview of where we are in terms of the risks, but also the actions we take. And obviously we're all very happy to take further detailed questions as part of this deep dive. Thank you, Chair.
Bridget, did you want to say anything before the floor?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for all that you do. Having looked at your agenda, oh my goodness, it's nearly as bad as the board's agendas. So well done on that. And thank you particularly, John, for your leadership here, which I hear has been extremely valuable and very much appreciated. I'm very miffed to find out this committee gets lunch and my committee doesn't get lunch actually. So I'm taking. I'm taking that one away. So we don't work in isolation. So obviously, the combined authority is involved in a sort of multitude of organisations. I mean, I've been delighted that climate change and environmental issues have become a much larger priority, much higher up the list of priorities for the organisation under the current mayor. I have led on climate and environment as part of the Oxford-Cambridge Pan-Regional Partnership for the last 7 years. And we have fostered very close relationships there. So the work that's been done, particularly on the Oxcam environment principles, have been adopted by this organisation. So we're not functioning in isolation. We are benefiting from the work of other bodies which are have strategic very important links to us. And we have resourced up. It was slow at the start, but actually we've got rather extraordinary people now leading, so I'm very pleased the way things have been going.
Thank you, Bridget. Okay, floor is open.
First of all, I think we should agree or not the structure of these deep dives. Personally, I think that the way it's laid out it answers all the questions that we might have, but I think that we need to agree or not that. On the risk score, I am concerned that the target impact score is still moderate rather than low or whatever it might be. It does say early on in the risk description that the combined authority has a strategic and convening role in terms of wider climate and environmental impact. And then it goes on to talk about the effect, including drought and flooding becoming more commonplace in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, which, as Adrian knows, is topics close to my heart. I personally think that moderate is too high as a target impact, and we should be looking for something significantly lower, and we should be demonstrating what we are doing to reduce drought and flooding in Cambridgeshire. And I got the impression that we were doing a lot of talking and not a lot of influencing of other people who understandably often have the money and the wherewithal to do things. But those are my thoughts.
Yes, please.
So thank you. Well, I think we have to be realistic here, quite honestly. And, having a target that's less than moderate, I think actually, the reality is we're setting ourselves up to fail. So I think, and a target is only a target. Sometimes it's very good to exceed a target. It doesn't mean that that's the point at which we stop working. You've already had a very interesting debate about how risk registers are dynamic and things are changing. I think local government reorganisation is an additional threat to this work stream as well. We already know that we have partner councils who prioritise this work in different ways. It's for my own council, climate and environment is the umbrella over absolutely everything we do. It doesn't quite feature in the same way in everybody, and depending on what amalgamations of councils come out of local government reorganisation, those conversations are going to be very, very tricky, and no doubt there will have to be compromise. I think there's been reference to the fact that we've got a mayoral election coming up. I think that's a considerable threat, irrespective of who it is at the end of the day, because a new mayor coming in will have priorities of his or her own, and they might not be the same priorities that we have at the moment. So I think that's going to make, well, hopefully it won't make things difficult. Hopefully it will actually boost the work that we're doing through the climate and environment and housing group. But we have to be realistic that it might not, and there might be some interesting discussions. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that.
Thanks, Bridget.
Thanks, Chairman. I've got a number of questions, but can I follow up on Councillor Wilson's comments there? Because on page 45, under the effect heading, the first four bullets all talk about weather and flooding. And I agree with your comment about there's not a great deal within the rest of the deep dive that actually tells us what's being done, what's physically being done rather than being talked about within this area. So can we have some examples as to what's being done, please, to manage?
Okay. So I'm going to ask Adrian to talk about that in more detail. But if I may say, so again, going back to the point about this being dynamic and not being something that's set in stone, overheating is going to be a massive issue of the future, and Baroness Brown has been highlighting that. And we know, I think Adrian was just telling me before this meeting, for every sort of half a degree that the climate, the temperature increases, there's a metric that says there are so many more hundreds or thousands admissions into hospital. And we know in places like in India, people die from heat when they go into hospital. They go in with an appendix and they die of heat. So there are these other emerging things. Again, this is about us delivering on our partnership working, and again, as all our local authorities are all heavily involved in managing flooding and the other sort of water related issues that come to it. But if I may refer to Adrian to give some detail, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bridget. In terms of some examples, I think it's already been discussed. We have a convening role, and in terms of tackling water supply, water challenges, obviously that's a huge capital expenditure on new infrastructure, which is not something the Combined Authority is funded to do. But what we are doing is we have a seat on Water Resources East, which is the body charged with bringing forward the water resources plan for the East of England. And so we have an active role in that, and they've identified additional long-term infrastructure needs, including both the Lincolnshire and Fenland Reservoir. The Fenland Reservoir is well advanced and coming forward. So we are engaging in that debate and influencing the situation. But obviously we're not in a position to fund the actual outcome of those deliberations. Similarly, the situation around water supply was highlighted by the Environment Agency objecting to growth around Greater Cambridge. So there is a risk there to the ambitions of growth for the Combined Authority. The government has responded to local pressure on that in terms of setting up a water delivery group and is exploring short-term measures, including a system of water credits to put more investment into the area. So again, we've been involved at a high level in that, not directly in the water delivery group, because our partner councils are very much at the forefront of that through the discussions around the local plan. And in terms of flooding, then we have supported the recent work done by the Tyndall Centre to come up with a revised FENS risk assessment, which is some very alarming conclusions in terms of the risk the area faces through climate change impacting on flooding. And we have promoted that work and will continue to look at how that's taken forward. The committee has dedicated money this coming year to update the risk assessment, climate risk assessment for the whole Combined Authority area. It's also put money aside to look at the pathways to achieving a reduction in carbon emissions. And that's all part of reviewing the climate action plan. And then we've got a few demonstrator projects, probably is the best description, where some of the capital funding we do have available has gone towards addressing some of the climate risks, including some work on the environment in terms of chalk streams, for example, which are international designations. And as we know, the south of the area is mostly served by public water supply being pumped from the underground aquifer. And there are obviously interactions with what the other departments of government are saying around the impact on the environment. So I think we do have examples, but we are very much in a partnership mode in terms of there are systems in place elsewhere to deliver the major infrastructure.
Thanks very much, Amy. I think that's a very nice insight. Because our role is not to judge whether the goodness or badness of what's being done, but to get some assurance that there is a proper approach to dealing with the issue in the risk register. Gary, we don't want to go into flooding.
No, I'm not going to go there.
It's happening down my street because I get flooded every.
Absolutely. I was just going to echo what you said there, going back to this this committee's role, which is the how. I think going through this report here, I think it shows to me that we've got a very good process in place for managing climate control and understanding it within the Combined Authority. And I'm very happy with the explanation behind how that scoring has been put together as well in there. So I go back to our how wise. So I'm very happy with the report there.
You're always helpful, Gary, with the how. Martin, I'm never quite sure.
Exactly. Yeah, me neither. So three things. So Bridget said, did anyone want to add anything to that? Bridget said, did anyone want to add anything to that? If everyone remembers. And what I would add, Bridget, is that your point was much more politely made than my point earlier. But the point is, in the governance system of the Combined Authority, one person is in charge, the mayor. We do what he or she leads. That's my point on that. Second point is, we're surrounded by experts. And last night on the doorstep, I spoke to John Shanklin, who discovered the ozone zone in Cambridge. This happens all the time. Maybe.
He's very good about it.
He had a lot to say about how things were going badly wrong. I'll stop there, as Chair has interjected. Finally, my main point was going to be on what, more importantly, really, on what Judith said in her short report. And I think the point I'd make there is made before in other meetings, is that you said about global and local and all of that. It's important that we do what we can in our own lives and our own organisations, regardless of how small that impact might seem to be. Because if we don't all do something, the thing that we can, then it's just not going to happen. Like in Cambridge, you know, we work really hard on reducing carbon use, but it's only about a couple of percent or so. I don't remember the exact figure, but a very small number of percentage of the carbon use in Cambridge of everyone, all the companies and all of that. But we do what we can, and we have to lead on that. But that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. It is worth doing, and we should all do that as individuals and organisations. So I would encourage this organisation to do everything it possibly can to lead others in that respect.
Thank you, Martin. And perhaps I should just say that John Shanklin was one of the 3 people who discovered the ozone layer. We worked together at the British Antarctic Survey. So my sort of response is a man, I suspect. But we didn't always see it.
So if I may reply to the political point that's been made. So, you know, we work in a democracy. If I thought my voice didn't matter on the board of the Combined Authority, I wouldn't bother turning up. And I spend days of my life committed to the Combined Authority on top of, you know, running South Cambridgeshire as well. So I have had various meetings. I think I've had 3 meetings now with Jim McMahon, the Housing Minister. I've had one small meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister, where I've talked to them at length about the governance of combined authorities. And I do seriously believe that the governance structure we have here is the right governance structure, because it is completely democratic. And, you know, even though the mayor has certain mayoral powers, they don't have total power. And, you know, it is a board and it acts democratically. And okay, you know, I think at the end of the day, you know, mayors can, I mean, I'm never quite sure about the mayor's power of veto, and I'm not sure about how it's written into the current white paper. And I sit on the board of the Local Government Association, and we're asking for clarification of one sentence in that white paper, which kind of implies that, you know, if mayors don't like it, it doesn't matter what the rest of us think, but we need clarification of that, because sometimes you get dangerous mayors, quite honestly, as you get dangerous prime ministers and presidents and so on. And, you know, we need to be protected against that. So, you know, it is a democracy, and if we thought our voice didn't matter and we didn't have influence, we wouldn't do the job.
I normally have always tried to keep politics outside this room, given the nature of it, but maybe this is maybe this is one that merits those comments. I think one of the reasons we decided, or we agreed, and the Combined Authority Board agreed, that the chair of the committee would be independent, should be independent for us, not the same elsewhere necessarily. It was continuity. And one piece of continuity is that when environment reared its head 4 or 5 years ago, there was a reluctance in the Combined Authority to put it on the risk register. And it was one of our rare interventions, as opposed to the normal business of approving and recommending, where we said it needed to be on the risk register. And if I look back on what I see as the acid test of an audit committee, is if we make recommendations to the board, do they accept them? Or do they explain to us why they didn't? And they've always accepted our recommendations. So if whatever happens in the future, this committee feels uncomfortable with the way the Combined Authority is handling environment and climate change issues, they should jolly well say so. Not as this is the right answer, but this is something that needs to be in the internal control process.
I'd be immeasurably grateful for that commitment. That would be marvellous. Thank you.
Okay. And we got one. Gary lauded the approach of this deep dive. Graham made the point, is this the model for future deep dives? And I would ask we've been all learning on this. This is about the third time we've done this. It does seem to me that both in the way of the paperwork and having the expertise around the table to answer our questions is a model which we'd encourage the officers to continue with. And when it's appropriate, as we've enjoyed today, if we could have the lead member from the board, if it justifies that, I think that increases our understanding and confidence, and it is a public forum so people can see how these things are done. So thanks very much, everybody. Thank you, Bridget. Okay, so the bad news is that we have 18 items on the agenda, 19 if we do the next meeting, and we've just completed number 5. Nevertheless, there is lunch, but only because we've got a very long agenda. This is the first time in 8 years. Don't get me wrong. And now on my right, they're worried whether it's going to turn out sense. Okay. We'll just smoke a moment whilst we resettle. Okay, welcome. Well, the next 3 items on the agenda are all led by Jules Yent. Did I get that right? Supported variously by her colleagues. So we have the first one off is the performance framework, which is really to note progress on how things are going and how we're getting there. And this is part of us understanding the internal control process of which performance management is a key part. Jules.
Thank you, Chair. Delighted to be joined this morning by Dan Buckridge, who is our Performance and Evaluation Manager. So we're bringing this report to committee today to enable you to review our progress on implementing the performance management framework that was approved by board in September 2023. And this is to support you in your role of reviewing the framework on an annual basis to ensure it's fit for purpose and working effectively. And this role itself is set out in page 16 of the framework. So we're going to provide an update on progress since the previous report to this committee, which was in June last year. And I'm going to pass to Dan, who will take us through some highlights.
Thank you. Section 2 of the report, starting on page 52 of the agenda pack, details the commitments made in the framework and the progress made against those commitments. A status is shown for each of the commitments to show those that have been achieved and those in development. Section 2.17 sets out the next steps. So the elements of the framework that we've implemented so far are the corporate key performance indicators, including quality assurance activity and new processes that we've implemented to improve data quality recently. We've got quarterly corporate performance reports that go to our corporate management team, overview and scrutiny committee and the combined authority board. And we've recently brought reports forwards so that we have more up-to-date performance reported earlier to the board. We have Directorate Business Plan performance reporting. The Directorate Business Plans were introduced last year the previous year, and are now being monitored and reported on to corporate management team. We have the mayoral question time events that's now due to take place annually. We have partner engagement activity that's been taking place on performance management alongside work on risk. And we have the State of the Region report and dashboards that's been introduced. Learning excellence, achievement and performance, LEAP all staff performance reports, reviews, are now business as usual activity. And we've increased the staffing to support performance management within Jules's team. We've got some commitments where further development is needed. Those include thematic performance reports. So those have been reprioritised. They're likely to be informed by a review of corporate performance indicators, which are going to align with a new mayoral mandate from May. So with the Combined Authorities corporate strategy extended for a year to March 2026, we do acknowledge that fuller reviews may be undertaken after the election and a review of corporate performance indicators and targets is likely to take place alongside that. We also other commitments where further developments needed include the project performance dashboard, social media content. So we do publish all of our performance reports, but we acknowledge that not all of our public are going to be reading agenda items. So other ways of engaging with the public audience are needed. And we also have the Gateway Review. The final report for Gateway Review 2 is currently underway and due to be completed by October. And we acknowledge we need to do more performance management training. So both refreshers for existing staff who've done it previously and training for new staff who've joined since it was last undertaken. We've also noted at 2.17 on page 56 that there are some expected changes to the National Performance Framework. So further details on those are going to follow as more detail comes out on the devolution white paper, and we're going to keep a watching brief on those to inform any actions that we need to take. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the way you've laid the paper out and focusing on where you've reached point of plateau and getting on with it, and while you're still climbing up the slopes. Questions? Comments? You've clean bowled. I've got very clear. Okay, that's the. I thought I did have a couple of questions there, and it really this and all your three items today, Jules, are long and complex, and you labour in the garden where this is all important. But if I went and asked somebody on the staff, what would they say about all this stuff?
So you're absolutely right that actually the implementation of this is where it's make or break, isn't it? And we've been working on the culture of the organisation as well, and the awareness of the importance of these frameworks. So as it's mentioned in the paper, one of the measures that we've been doing is to set up internal working groups. And this has proved to be a really valuable way of engaging senior leaders in the organisation and developing that understanding of why it's important to provide accountability to members and to the public, why it's important indeed in the next paper about monitoring and evaluation to have more consistent approach to doing those things. So I think it's small steps. Cultural change takes time, but we're seeing really encouraging progress on doing that.
Okay. Please carry on.
Thank you. Just to add to that, we did a pulse survey during a all staff meeting recently to inform this review, just to get some feedback on awareness of our performance management framework and feelings on the culture. We got a positive result on the culture that 78.5% of staff agreed to some extent that we have a strong performance management culture within the organisation. However, I think it was about 40% of staff were aware of the performance management framework. So there is a gap in knowledge of that. And that's why we've noted the need for training and awareness raising generally. So it's noted that that's something we need to work on.
And I've got one other question, because as Jules knows, I'm a bit in my management junk kit, balanced scorecards or something I encountered before. If I read this right, you've achieved it. Is that what it says? You now have a balanced scorecard.
Exactly. So that was yes, I'm still speaking. So the first commitment was to have a balanced scorecard reviewed as business as usual. And so the corporate KPIs that we developed have been reported quarterly. And there has been a little bit of shift in some of the KPIs, as you would expect, which has been taken to board for their approval. But it's established as an effective way of providing that insight to the board.
And how confident you are we've got the information that has to flow through the organisation to make these devices worthwhile?
Absolutely, that's so important, isn't it? And so we have KPI leads throughout the organisation for each of the KPIs. It's been very helpful having the increased capacity in the team so that we now have that liaison going on a quarterly basis with officers. And we've also responded to an internal audit recommendation that we do some additional data verification. So as well as accepting the information that's given to us, we're also challenging it and ensuring the quality of that data as well.
Any no? Okay. When do you're almost there? Are you almost there? I mean, when will the status achieved appear on everyone?
Sorry, I didn't catch that last bit.
When you helpfully colour coded your report, when will they all be green?
That's a good question. I think we're always looking to continuously improve. So I think we'll get things done. You know, they'll be implemented, but we will always be going back and reviewing and improving processes.
That was when do you get to the achieved status for all of them, do you think?
I think we're probably looking at Q2 for all of the thematic performance reports. I wouldn't say they'd all be done in Q1. And some of it potentially depends on decisions after the mayoral election on changes to the corporate performance indicators, because obviously we want alignment between what's reported to the board, what's reported to the thematic committees, how that links to our director of business plans.
Okay. Well, I think there may be in the autumn, perhaps another update to the committee. And if you could bring some examples so we could see what a balanced scorecard looks like, and any other high level pieces of paper which focus management's attention on where things go right and wrong. Okay, thanks very much. And thank you, Daniel. Jules is not let off. Number 7, there's a protocol procedural nuance to this, where the paper asks us to approve, and we don't approve other than the accounts because we're not an executive committee. When I talked beforehand, there's a sort of nuance. Does the board have to approve it, or is this just a piece of management stuff that the senior management team can approve, taking account of any comments we may have? We'll leave that puzzle for the officers to resolve, but we are not an approving body in this sort of document. Yes, Paul.
Chairman, yes, I think it's very important that you highlight that slight distinction. May I suggest that when producing these papers for the Audit and Governance Committee, that it's recognised that our role is to review and recommend to the board where appropriate. And so we won't approve the draft new equality policy, but we might recommend the draft new policy to the board.
Yeah,
or recommend otherwise.
Now, this is an outlier, but I think also it's because in the minds of the officers, does this merit going to the board? Is it the sort of piece of business that needs board approval? That's for them to solve in the constitutional issue, and we'll leave it to them. But we will consider it and provide feedback to Jules. So, Jules, you want to introduce it now? I've derailed your opening sentence.
Thank you. Very happy to continue to work with the monitoring officer on that point that you've just raised. And I'm joined for this item by my colleague Alex Kosinski O'Donnell, who is our senior policy officer. So we're bringing a new equality policy for service provision for your review. And this policy will be a significant step forward in ensuring that the combined authority consistently complies with its responsibilities under the Equality Act and the Public Sector Equality Duty. So I think it's just worth pausing on what those responsibilities are. Under the Equality Act, we have a legal duty to consider, evaluate and publish information on how people are or will be affected by our policies and practices. And as a public sector equality duty, we're also required to demonstrate that when making strategic decisions, we have due regard to the need to remove unlawful discrimination, harassment and victimisation, to advance equality of opportunity between those who share a protected characteristic and those who do not, and to foster good relations between those who share a protected characteristic and those who do not. And for our combined authority, in terms of protected characteristics, that also includes care experience, as decided by the board just over a year ago. There's a link to the risk register item for this, because the risk of not adequately complying with this legislation is currently noted as a medium corporate risk. We've also begun developing an equality impact assessment procedure, which will sit under this policy. I'm going to pass to Alex to tell us more.
Thank you, Jules. The equality policy for service provision will ensure a consistent approach to evaluating the impact of our policies, services, procurement and decision making. By embedding a rigorous impact analysis, we can ensure assessments are proportionate to the scale and significance of any potential equality impacts and take an evidence-based approach to drive positive action and improve service delivery for all communities across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
You just relax, Alex. We're not
so
as bad as we look.
The development of the policy and procedure has been informed by extensive engagement that my team has taken forward with internal and external stakeholders. So these have included the Equality and Human Rights Commission, Cambridge County Council, and Peterborough City Council, other male combined authorities, and senior leaders across the combined authority. This policy will sit alongside our existing HR, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion policy, as a twin policy and forming part of an integrated EDI framework. Our next step is to work with officers to test and refine the EQIA procedure and develop a detailed implementation plan. We would welcome the opportunity to draw on your experience in developing this procedure, for example, in a workshop after Easter, if that would be of interest. And we're very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Jules. Thank you.
It's not a question really, but just a comment. I mean, it is ironic that we're talking about protected characteristics under Equality Act 2010, but the table is populated by men, full stop. And we're taking decisions on that, or as you say, not taking decisions, but we're considering the item. And it would be good if we could have a bit more diversity in this meeting, I guess. But just a comment. Thank you, Chair.
Before we go on, it probably is worth, because people sitting around this table are the ones put forward by the constituent authorities. So there's a touch of heal thyself position. But I did notice, it's something I think officers should think about. As to, we don't, my own view of these matters is if you do it for the sake of doing it, that's wrong. So you should be looking for opportunities where it makes sense. But tokenism isn't what we're talking about here. And Paul's going to correct me now.
I'm just going to say that having had many years' experience of audit committees, it isn't just a question of position heal thyself. It is a reality that it's actually quite difficult to get a gender balance on audit committees, because when appointments are being made to committees, whether it's at a district council level, county council level, or the combined authority level, it's a question of who's interested in the role. And my experience has been that it's actually very difficult to get women to come forward and be members of an audit and governance committee, purely because they get put off by the audit aspect. And it's something that individuals have to take on themselves, because you can't expect group leaders or councils to simply say, we're going to appoint a woman to this role because we want a gender balance, if as a result you appoint somebody who's unsuitable to the role. Because you not only have an obligation to be equal, you have an obligation to provide qualified people to attend these committees. And it's no good having people on this committee who know nothing about accounts, because otherwise they can't perform properly to the thing. So it's a much wider thing. And actually, the people who are best able to change that culture are the accountancy firms in the way they recruit and train staff. Because if you get more female accountants, you're more likely to get more females interested in being on audit committees. And
Okay.
It's the reality is that we need to work with who's available.
Thank you. We don't want philosophizing. We don't need any more. We've had our bit, you and I.
Yes, a couple of things really. It's a bit disappointing, some of the conversation there, because the protected characteristics are a bit more than just gender. So we do not know if we've got a diverse range of people around this because of age, disability, neurological characteristics, all those sorts of things as well. So that needs to be something that really does get sort of people just need to be aware of that and be made to be around, not just focus on one thing about diversity. Diversity is much more wider than just gender. I suppose I echo Paul's comments as well. There is that I hope this doesn't go down the route of, dare I call it, having a tick box exercise, and that we do select people based on their capabilities and their fit for the roles as well. And then the last one is Richard's sort of question for my side, because he talks about diversity for service provision. Could you just explain what the scope of that is, please? Because I don't quite understand that.
Certainly. So it's strategic decision making. So in the future, when you can expect an equality impact assessment to be presented alongside a proposal for a decision. So it's in development of all policies and strategies. And it also is in development of business cases as well. I think they're the main areas of activity. But we need to take a proportionate approach. And we need to work within the capacity of the organisation. So it's about, we have a plan to develop EQIA champions who will then support their teams to adopt this way of working.
Last one.
Jules mentioned that this is related to strategic decision making, and it's specifically responsibilities of the staff in this policy. Where is our role in this, or the mayors, or the board members, or other committees? Where do they fit in, and should they be specifically excluded and said the relevant provision for them is in XYZ or wherever it might be? Because I think that the principles that you're describing here apply equally to us and the mayor and other board members.
Thank you. Yes, and so there's sort of two aspects to that. There's the aspect of members carrying out their role in scrutiny or decision making, whatever it might be, and there will be an opportunity to challenge an EQIA if you feel that the proposal does not respond effectively to the evidence that's been collected. Then that's something that you can drill into in that decision-making process. And then, of course, as we were talking about earlier, there's also the diversity of the organisation itself, and that sits more in the HR side of the EDI policy in developing the organisation's own response.
Okay. Thank you. This is tricky stuff. I mean, nobody can disagree with the aims, I don't think. But I think we've had a germ of what it's about. What does this mean in reality? And it's not it's such a complex thing. It's for it's how do you get, or we'd encourage you to work your way to there's an understanding of what it means in practice. It doesn't mean we must have 3 of those and 4 of those and 1 of those, because that's not what the organisation is about. But it needs to, as you say, it's fostering. So how do you know that you're succeeding with these aims? Fostering is in promoting the culture. Do you know whether you're fostering it or not, or is it just more bureaucracy?
Thank you. Yeah, very good question. So on the first point that you were making, we've really benefited from the network of officers across the Mayoral Combined Authority network that there has been. So there's a lot of effective practice to draw on, and how you actually make this real, how you make it a workable change to a way of working, and also building on what we currently do. So it's an improvement. And in terms of measurements, absolutely. So in the implementation plan, there will be indicators that will agree to actually measure and collect data on the success of implementing the policy itself.
I think we're probably happy to leave it there. I don't sense we need. Is in your mind you need to bring this back in some future time, or are you happy that this gets woven into business as usual?
So the question for you is to whether you'd like to have an involvement in the next stage, which is the more detailed development of the equality impact assessment procedure and how that sits and kind of flows through the organisation. But in terms of bringing back, absolutely happy to, but that wasn't a part of our proposal to do that on a regular basis.
Well, I don't see them rushing to your workshops. So we thank you for the offer, and thank you for the paper, but I think we just wish you well in moving this forward in a practical way.
Yeah.
And I leave it to officers to determine this is a legal requirement. You have this document. There's a procedural issue as to who needs to bless it finally, but it isn't us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we got light back. Good. So right. Okay, number 8. I think this is your last hurrah. And you've got Emma with you now, is that right? Yeah, okay. So let me see. We are to consider the project, the paper. Is that right?
Thank you. Yes, this will be brought to board next month as well. And Dan here and Emma Charter is our Senior Performance and Evaluation Officer. So we're bringing this report to enable you to review. No, that's the wrong script. Try again. Shouldn't have 3 papers at one meeting. Monitoring and evaluation framework. This has been a considerable amount of work, and we're absolutely delighted to bring this for your review this morning. As noted earlier, development of a monitoring and evaluation framework is a control against the corporate risk of failure to deliver work programmes within budget and planned timeframes. And this is currently assessed as a medium risk. And so this framework is going to have a strong impact in helping us to improve that position. And Dan and Emma are going to take us through some of the key points from the report.
Okay.
Thank you. We're bringing this report to committee today to enable members to consider the draft refreshed monitoring and evaluation framework in your papers at Appendix A, starting at page 81 on the agenda pack. We'd welcome comments on its content, and we're seeking your endorsement before moving forward for consideration at the board. This is to support the committee to carry out its role of providing assurance and oversight of governance and supporting frameworks. We're going to be taking a test and learn approach to the guidance and procedures we're developing as part of the implementation of the framework, and members will be invited to attend a workshop on this. The purpose of the updated monitoring and evaluation framework is to set out how we will effectively and consistently monitor and evaluate project and programme performance across the combined authority. The framework's been refreshed to align with the single assurance framework and the performance management framework, both of which were approved by the combined authority board in 2023. Section 2 of the covering report, found on page 74 in the agenda pack, highlights the importance of monitoring and evaluation. It lists key principles aimed at ensuring that we take a pragmatic and proportionate approach to tracking progress and measuring the impacts and outcomes of projects and programmes. This will ensure the right balance between the benefits of completing high quality, tailored monitoring and evaluation and our available resources. I'll now hand over to Emma.
Thank you. So section 2 on page 75 of the agenda pack highlights that the framework is aligned to best practice guidelines, as well as our corporate strategy and our shared ambition for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. A partnership approach has been taken in developing the framework, with stakeholders engaged, including our constituent councils, internal project and service managers, mayoral combined authorities monitoring and evaluation network, and also support from the What Works Centre for Local Economic Growth. Section 2 on page 77 also explains that during the development of this framework, we have adopted a test and learn approach by implementing improvements as and when they've been identified. An example of a recent improvement include providing earlier support to project managers from our team. We are developing a detailed monitoring and evaluation procedure alongside this framework, which will include some tools, templates and guidance, and we will continue to refine these based on user experience and that co-design element. To effectively implement and embed the framework, we will also focus on staff engagement and awareness. Staff with monitoring and evaluation responsibilities will be provided with training and development opportunities appropriate to their role, including some training on logic models. Page 78 in the agenda pack outlines a timeline and the next steps for the framework. So following this audit and governance committee meeting, the Combined Authority Board will be invited to approve the framework on the 19th of March. Once the draft monitoring and evaluation procedure has been developed, we will invite members of the Audit and Governance Committee to a workshop after Easter as part of our test and learn approach, if that would be of interest. And we are proposing the framework will be reviewed annually by this committee and our internal audit team to ensure that it continues to meet the needs of the Combined Authority and our partners. And the Combined Authority Board will be accountable for approving any significant amendments to the monitoring and evaluation framework. We're very happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. I mean, it's a huge body of work you brought. And I can't imagine how long it takes you to get to this position, but you're now there. Okay, colleagues, let's review and comment.
Thank you, Chair. Brilliant framework and gone through it in quite some detail in there, very robust in there. I suppose the main question I've got is going back to the role of this committee is how you're going to ensure that this framework is actually embedded and followed on those single assurance frameworks and on those projects as well.
I'll take a go at answering that. So one of the things we already have in place is a single projects register. We have some information being recorded there on evaluation plans already, and we plan to make sure that that's kept up to date and captures the information around what is planned and what is taking place. We'll be able to review that report on, when an evaluation was due, was it actually completed. In terms of going forwards with new projects, the monitoring and evaluation will be part of the business. It already is part of the business case process, but we're going to build on that. We're going to be expecting proportionate monitoring and evaluation plans to be developed. We're working on that template. That'll be part of the process procedures that we're developing with colleagues, with partners as well, just to check it works, so that we can have a good plan for how monitoring and evaluation will take place will be considered as part of the business case, so that if we've got a very innovative project, that we're putting the right level of focus on the evaluation, pilot activity that might potentially lead to a new way of delivering projects in future, or delivering on an area.
On a similar vein to Councillor Christie's question, on page 100 of the pack, it talks about the committee's role in reviewing the framework and what we're going to do. Would it be possible and speak to internal audit colleagues here is before we get a future report on the effectiveness, if we ask our internal audit colleagues to actually review the effectiveness of the monitoring evaluation framework and how it's used has delivered better outcomes and improved project and programme governance. Because otherwise we're just going to be taking, I'm not going to say it's going to be wrong, officers' views. And I think I'd certainly, knowing what this paper's telling us is going to be done, I'd certainly welcome internal audit's view on the effectiveness of that before we come back and review the framework again.
I can see Nathan limbering up, but you want to also, we're going to allow the internal auditors.
So our intention was, I think perhaps those the two paragraphs be reordered. Our intention was to go to internal audit first, if they were happy to do to have a look at it, so that you could be better informed when it comes to you.
Nick, yes, sorry, and I got your Christian name. It's too many. No, so, and I got you in the wrong job when we spoke before. So
I've been Nathan from external audit so far. Today, so I've done quite well, haven't I? Yes, I mean, I guess Jules and colleagues, I guess I've been going through all of those areas. They're all areas that we could look at within the audit plan at some point. So I guess it's been quite an informative meeting just for me leading into the annual planning discussion later today. So I mean certainly some work around how well those performance and project processes are working, but also how well embedded they are, and whether that's the case of looking at the kind of design and structure of those now and then revisiting in future years to see how well that is sort of formally embedded. But yeah, I mean, very good point. It's a perfect example of a good internal audit area.
One further question you make. You've used the term logic models on a number of occasions. What's a logic model?
I'll attempt to answer that. So that's how we are presenting. That's the internal tool template we're using to present the theory of change. So how we go from what we're planning to do as an intervention, what we're intending that to achieve. So what inputs are we putting in? What activities are we doing? What outputs are they going to deliver? The things we're going to do through to the outcomes and the impacts. So it's basically just a nice, pretty way of showing what we intend the project to deliver and the things, the metrics that we're going to measure to see whether that happens or not.
You can write an essay on it, Nathan. Any other? No. Okay. I mean, you talked about getting at the start of a project, but of course the end of the project is human nature is when I finished. I don't actually want to fold a tent and learn what I learnt. Your role is very much enforcement, isn't it? How does it? How, when they see you coming, do they react? And how do you get a collaborative approach when you're there to make sure that stuff's done how it ought to be done?
Way, of course, but I'm not sure that I agree that ours is purely an enforcement role. I think that one of the key messages that we will be sharing with staff as we roll out this framework is that it's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to do things better. It's an opportunity to celebrate. There's lots coming out from evaluations that comms can use. So I think there are many positives about embracing more monitoring and evaluation that staff will go alongside.
Okay, but it does seem as a challenge in the role that you have to make sure that the positives get through with the chiding, if that's what it is. Okay. Any other comments? Thank you, and I'm sure members will react. I think it's good that you're going to invite members individually to the opportunity to partake in a workshop. This might be a bit more. I don't know whether it'll be of interest or not. If I was here, I'd probably want to go because these are interesting. How the internal control. This is about internal control in a different way, isn't it? Yeah. This is the managerial and the governance internal control rather than the right bits of money in the right place and not being misused. So I think we should encourage you in your endeavours. And thank you, Jules. And thank you particularly for bringing your colleagues to the table, because A, it's not as bad as you thought it was going to be, and B, we get a better flavour of when we meet the people who are actually doing the work. That's part of our assurance processes, because we can see whether you're on your mark, and you clearly are. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right. How are we doing? Are we going to get the 70s? Are you still worried? Okay. Okay. All right. So it's now 11:35. So we stop at 12 to have a sandwich. And then I just looked at my notes. We've now got draft financial strategies. If I could do it, 75 pages.
I'm sure I can do it in less than 75 minutes.
Okay, and we are to review and comment upon the draft capital, non-treasury investment and treasury management strategies for the next year.
Thank you, Chair. So these, of course, come to the committee annually, and the financial strategies, as we refer to them, are key documents which govern how the combined authority invests and manages its significant capital resources. There are 4 documents, as you mentioned. The capital strategy is sort of the overarching document. It provides a high-level overview. It's specifically aimed at members, setting out how the CPCA handles stewardship of public money to achieve value for money, sustainability and affordability. Or below that, in effect, there's the treasury management strategy, which I'm sure this committee is most familiar with, which sets out how we handle funding we've received in advance of need. So making sure the cash we've got from government until we need to spend it is well implemented and safeguarded. And the non-treasury investment strategy, which definitely has the catchiest title, which is everything else, our service investments, when we're actually spending money to deliver things rather than just looking after it until it's needed. Finally, alongside those, we are required to publish a statement called the minimum revenue provision, which is effectively what government uses to replicate setting aside money to repay borrowing. This is something that I'll talk a bit about now, because this is the first time in the combined authority's existence that it's actually planning to borrow. So there is actually some significant change coming up that the committee should be aware of, and I'm planning to focus on that rather than the relatively minor changes to the documents themselves, which they're covered in the report. Most of it's just business as usual, updating for the new year's financial plan, etc., rather than fundamental changes. So what's caused this change is the decision by the Mayor, as you heard just a couple of weeks ago, to proceed with franchising. Part of the outline business case for that is that the combined authority is going to acquire or build bus depots in the area. There is lots of stuff out there if you want to read in more detail about that, but fundamentally it comes down to it's a requirement as part of a franchise network to make it a fair opportunity for small operators to come in and bid on contracts. If we don't acquire them ourselves, it means that anyone who already has a depot in the area has a significant commercial advantage in bidding for contracts. So it's effectively a requirement of the franchise network for us to go and acquire these locally. The detail behind that, while there is a lot out there already, is still being developed as part of the depot strategy, where they'll be located, and there will be specific business cases coming forward covering those acquisitions or buildings. But the principal and anticipated costs were approved by the board as part of the MTFP in January, and they are therefore in the financial plan and in our projected borrowing requirement for the forthcoming year. What that means is we might go, and we're anticipating to go, from being an organisation that has cash on hand to one that will need to borrow to meet its cash requirements. That change is most effectively seen on page 156 of the agenda pack, and I will pause for people to find it. It's a graph which has some golden bars and a green and blue line. Oh, and I can see it.
What's the ISIN number? Because we don't have page numbers online, do we?
Do you know?
Oh, good. On the individual item, it's page 5. Sorry, that's Appendix 4A, page 5. So within the Treasury Management Strategy, No, okay, I didn't go back far enough.
And so benchmark indeed. So as you'd be unsurprised, I love it. And so what this is showing is those golden bars are the loans we currently or will have agreed as a combined authority. So at the beginning of this year, we had nearly £200 million in cash out on loans to other local authorities back to government, generating interest for us. In 2025, that's dropping by about 50 million as we're spending more than we get in, which is expected. And then in 2026, you see that taking a significantly further drop down to about 50 million. And then in the years beyond that, it disappears entirely. And what that's showing is in 2027 to 2029, we're actually expecting to need to borrow money to meet our cash flow requirements in the short term for returning to surplus in 2030 and onwards. So that is really, for the Treasury management function of the combined authority, quite a fundamental change. We've gone from giving money out to needing to be aware of what we're going to do in terms of borrowing. In the first year of that, what we are expecting to see, where you see that big drop in cash reserves, is while the entire of the programme for acquiring these depots is funded across the 30-year lifetime of the business case for franchising, in reality, that cash need for buying the depots is probably going to be met from our treasury cash, something that's called internal borrowing. So we're using money we've got for some other reason that we don't need yet to pay for the in-year costs of building the asset. Then in, say, the next year when we're delivering those services, we'll actually end up borrowing in reality. So what that means for 25-26, the year we're looking at here specifically, we're not expecting to need to borrow. We're expecting to use the money we've got on hand to offset our need elsewhere in the business. And then as we go into future years, as we need to use that money, we are expecting to end up in a small net borrowing position. In practical terms, what that really means is we're expecting a lot less in treasury management income because we're just going to have less cash in hand. There are areas in the treasury management strategy where it talks about the length of loans we're looking to take out. As you can see from that graph, we're not currently expecting to have a requirement to borrow for the long term. So even though we're buying or building assets that are likely to have 20, 30-year lifetimes, it may well be that it's cheaper for the authority to borrow for 2 years and pay interest over 2 years, because in the future we'll be able to fund that from other sources rather than taking out a 30-year loan and paying interest for 30 years when we only need it for 2. And that's reflected throughout the treasury management strategy. And obviously we'll be bringing frequent updates, well, as frequent as the committee desire, updates on treasury management position. But for 25-26, not expecting a huge change. You'll see some of the KPIs change, the amount of cash we're keeping on hand is reducing, but the fundamental shift will actually be the year after the one we're looking at here. Thought it important to flag that direction of travel of what's coming up to the committee today. Happy to take questions on that, and indeed the business as usual updates to the strategies from the committee.
When the mayor or board made the decision about bus franchising, did you brief him on this element as well? And are they aware of the costs involved?
So the medium-term financial plan approved in January included the anticipated cost of the bus depot acquisition. And actually it's been approved on a more prudent basis. We've included borrowing for 30 years in that to show what effectively, I don't like the phrase worst case scenario because something can always go wrong, but a more pessimistic view than we expect to be in reality. So we're budgeting for a more pessimistic outcome than we think the reality will be. And alongside all of the modelling and things like that, there was a description of the impact on the combined authority to inform the mayor's decision.
Martin.
2 questions. So thanks for that. Very clear. Thank you. Are the depots a statutory requirement, or is it just that it's a practical requirement? And the second question is the asset value of the depots. Where does that go? Does that just peter out as time goes on? And I suppose on the value of the depots, it sounded like from what you said that value, whether it's the sit value or the declining value is not paid for by the bus companies that use those depots. But I would have thought that would be the place to get that money from the franchisees.
So in terms of statutory versus practical, I must admit I'm not a legal expert. My understanding is to deliver a fair procurement and enable small medium enterprises to bid, we are doing it to enable that. We don't know whether it raises, there's certainly not a law that says you must own a depot, but there may well be something that says you must make a fair playing field. But I can come back if that is desired from a legal framework answer. In terms of who's paying for it, it depends how we structure it, and that'll probably come through the depot strategy. Fundamentally, yes, the bus operators using it are getting value out of it, although they're delivering services that the combined authority gets value from. In a franchised arrangement, the combined authority effectively procures all the bus services. So we could do it such that the combined authority is paying for the depot, in which case we'd expect lower costs from the operators, or we could move the responsibility for the depot to the operators, but that would then be reflected in their bid price for running the service. So that will be explored as part of the depot strategy, but it could be either way.
Well, let Martin finish.
Just come back, yeah. So from what you said there, it sounds to me like the obvious thing to do would be to make the bus operators pay for the depots eventually, because
there is an important question here from an accounting perspective as to whether the depots are owned by the combined authority or whether they are owned by a third party. If they are owned by a combined authority, they should appear on the balance sheet of the authority. And therefore, the question is, how are those assets treated on the balance sheet? How are they depreciated stroke amortized? And what is the revenue recognition that aligns with that? And that has an impact on the decision as to whether to provide the depots to operators free of charge, but therefore expect a lower cost from the operator, or to provide the depots to the operator at a charge and expect the operator to include that in their bid. That has a direct impact. The choice between those two options has a direct impact on the future revenue implications for the authority as well as the capital. And it's really a question of, if you recharge the cost of the bus depot to the operator, you have a revenue stream that allows you to amortize your investment. If you don't recharge the cost to the operator, how are you amortizing the investment, and where does that appear in the accounts? And that is, I think, something that it's legitimate for this committee to question and understand what the policy is behind that. If there is a policy that says we're going to provide this, we're going to bear the capital cost, but we have no provision to basically repay that capital cost, then what implication does that have for the way the assets are recognized on the balance sheet? And how do we amortize it? And how do we repay the debt associated with it? Because it's got to come from somewhere.
Absolutely.
Can you answer that?
I can answer it in brief. Because ultimately the answer is, again, that is going to be part of the consideration of the detailed depot strategy. In principle terms, I absolutely agree with the member. And if the approach were taken to pay for it internally, not charge it as part of the service cost to the operators, my expectation, and I don't want to presuppose what will come through in the detailed workings, is that we would need to make a charge to the service revenue to allow for the replacement costs over 30, 50 years for the depot if that isn't being received directly.
There is another aspect to that, is that if you recharge the cost of the depot to the operator, what you will do is you will, over time, you will increase the revenue of the authority, but you also have a cost to the authority. Yeah. If you don't recharge to the operator, then you reduce the lifetime revenue of the authority. And therefore there are implications, because you can massage the figures to make the authority look larger than it is or smaller than it is. And it is something that, you know, it's a political decision which way you go, but we need to understand what the decision is and why it has been made. And that latter part is more important.
Absolutely.
Okay. Can we make sure then that when we come back to franchising, that perspective comes in with all the other insights into the governance and internal control of the franchising initiative? It's Gary next, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I know I constantly do this, but bringing us back to the Audit and Governance Committee terms of reference, when he talked about ensuring that there was effective scrutiny of the Treasury Management strategy and policies in accordance with SIPFA's code of practice. I think you've explained that to us very, very well, Rob. So bringing us back to the hows of this particular process in here, and I think as you have explained there as well, the impact that this borrowing is going to have on Treasury management going forward. So I think that's what we need to note and make sure that it sounds like the scrutiny is on it and the policies are there. So very happy with the report. Thank you.
Martin.
Come back. Obviously, Paul and I are very interested in this, and I am too. Just one final thing I'd like to put on the table, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I might well be, but I think it's worth saying just in case. So it seems to me there is a bit of a quandary here in terms of the paying or not paying for the depots and who pays for them, because the point of all of this is to make it a level playing field. But if the users of the depots have to pay for them, that makes it not a level playing field, because the big operators who already have depots will then have to pay for depots they don't need. And so there's a point here, practical point really, about how one proceeds. Do we want those big operators to be in the game, or are we happy for them to push off and we don't want them? And that would not be what we'd want to say, but that would be the implication of that point. So I suppose it seems to me the only practical approach to that would be for the authority to pay for the depots and have them on their balance books, and not to further charge operators if that was the definite outcome that the authority wanted.
Yeah, we won't go down that rabbit hole, but I think the whole point of issue needs to be
bringing
when it comes back with the franchising thing, we need to get that insight and understand what is going on. Whether or not we agree with why they've done it is out with.
Not a franchising question, Chairman. On paragraph 310 on page 108, there's a reference to, no, sorry, 310 is about franchising. On 312, there's a talk about £5 million additional being provided for new business growth and social impact fund. And then again on page 142, where the changes have been made to the strategy to take account of the changes that have been made. Is the fund or the reference on 142 the same as that referred to as on page 108? Which is that business, page 142. It's a blue sort of line through text that says there's new.
So in 142, that second paragraph, which would be moved
Change, yeah.
From 20 to 25 million. Yes, that is the same thing.
That's the same thing. Okay. Can I ask, is that in that case then, because nowhere in that strategy does it say the funds will only be provided to businesses based in the combined authorities area? Is that the case, or are they, which would seem to suggest to me it should be, or is it a case that you'll loan money to anybody, anywhere?
That's ultimately a decision for the investment committee in approving the plan for the fund. I would say my expectation would be that whatever the investments are, they would benefit the combined authority region, but headquarters of the company may not necessarily reflect where they're delivering.
I understand that, but if they were based in some shape or form within the authority area, I'd expect only loans or grants to be given to authorities that are in there, irrespective of the return on the investment that the authority might get. And I just wondered if it's worthwhile making a comment around that, but likely not. But it's just something that I thought should be included. And as well, you mentioned going back to page 108 and paragraph 312, saying you increased it by £5 million. Is that, can I ask how much of the 20 million currently has sort of been loaned out? I mean, you've obviously given £5 million additional. So where does that current investment stand within that fund? I mean, have we invested 10, 15? Have we loaned 20 million already?
So that fund is currently going through the single assurance framework to approve its creation. The 25 million is a combination of two pre-existing thematic funds approved by the board. They have not been launched yet. So nothing has yet been invested from those, subject to the single assurance framework process, investment committee, and ultimately board approving the business case for the launching of that fund. The investment's expected to commence from 2025-26.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so my understanding is that this was a new fund made up of two previous funds. That's not the case.
Funds in terms of money within the MTFP, yes. Funds as in launched funds that have been loaning out money, no.
Okay, all right. And maybe it's a question, sorry, I should have asked previously when we were discussing about climate change. When we loan funds out, what do we include about that particular business trying to deliver on the authority's other objectives? So whether it be about new job creation or about, mitigating climate loss, is there any intention to link things like that into the conditions of the loan?
So there are various funds in the terms you're using in terms of things we're launching. Each one has its own selection criteria. There are fundamental ones underlying all of them, which are set out in the strategies that protect our investment from a financial perspective. From a service deliverables perspective, that's up to the individual funds' business cases coming through. For example, this one's aimed at economic growth, so it'll have different criteria to the climate change investment fund that's also recently been launched, so that they're targeting the right thing. So individual business cases, which are public documents, can be looked at to see what those conditions are, but they're not set out in these strategies as something that would apply to all of them.
Okay. Maybe they should do. I don't know. Maybe it needs to be a bit more joined up. I don't know. I'll leave that for others to decide, but it seems appropriate to me that if you've got aims of the board in all these areas, everything you're trying to do should be linked back somehow to those particular aims, but better people than me. Oh, sorry, Chair. I do apologise. Again, can I make
You're between us and that.
Yeah, sorry. Well, there's 1 minute. They've got 11:59 on my laptop. Can I ask again, for the new fund or the previous funds, do internal audit do any work about how the decisions are made about releasing those funds? Because £25 million is not a small amount of money. And again, maybe it's something, in your discussions this afternoon, you could have a chat with somebody about it, because I'd certainly be interested to know how that money is being spent or being loaned. Thank you.
You want to answer that?
I'll go first.
Okay. Okay, on my list. And we can pick it up on the work too.
Yeah, exactly. And we're also looking at the internal audit plan for next year. The internal audit plan, as I'll talk a bit about later, we're hoping to shift more from a corporate internal focus that we've had over the last couple of years due to the best value notice and improvement plan to more of a focus on service delivery. That will include likely include both a general review of the implementation and embedding of SAP, but also specific project areas or fund areas to track their approval through and make sure that they are adhering to the requirements.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we've been going an 2 hours more than halfway through an agenda number of items. You were warned it could be up till 2 o'clock. We'll take half an hour for lunch now and reconvene at 12:30. Chris, can you Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We're back with the second half of the agenda items. And we have now reached number 10, which is the internal audit progress report. Nick from RSM.
Thank you, Chair. So, hi, everybody. Yes, so this is item 10, this is the progress report. I'll take the report as read, but just summarise the key points for you and then pause for any questions as they come. So since the last committee in November, we've made positive progress, as hopefully you will see on the paper. We've finalised 3 further reports, so procurement and contract management, risk management and staff mental health and wellbeing, which I'll come back to in a bit more detail shortly. We've actually made more progress in the papers, give us credit for, as things have moved on since the paper. So we've actually also finalised a key financial controls audit for creditors, which isn't on the agenda to talk about today, but just to give you an early sight, that was also a positive outcome report. And the other 2 reviews that are noted as in QA there will be issued next week. So we've made pretty strong progress on that, and thanks to management colleagues for their swiftness in turning reports around. That just leaves, after those are issued, the final review, which is a follow-up review, which is I'll come to, always included in the paper as a note. So we're covering all 23, 24 actions, but also we're going to revisit the GDPR actions from the advisory review, so we can give a updated opinion in support of the overall opinion, noting that was quite negative at the time of review. So that'll give us the ability to give an updated view on GDPR. The other key point in that report was in regards to draft head of audit opinion. I know you're interested in talking about. So fundamentally, and this is not the end decision, but I'm looking at where we are, including that key financials report. We've now finalised 6 positive reports, just the 1 negative assurance report, which has been previously, which is on the agenda today, and then of course GDPR, which we're revisiting. So I think certainly in regards to where we were previous years and direction of travel, it's certainly very positive, and there's no indication at this stage, noting we're close into the programme, of anything other than the positive opinion for the year. So hopefully that's good news for the committee. Have to take comments on progress, that point around the head of audit opinion, before I summarise the reports for you.
Okay, colleagues. Me and drink, all by lunch.
I've got the perfect slot here, haven't I?
Chantal is here. Come and sit at the end of the table.
You can sit next to me, Chantal, if you wish.
Because we know that getting procurement on its feet properly has been a hard road for the combined authority, and more investment's gone into managing it, which Chantal will be brought on board. So I wasn't quite sure how to take the fact that it was a partial assurance, and I wondered if between you could enlighten us to what the underlying issues are and what is the prognosis.
Yes, so do you want me to summarise and I can feed in? So I guess the early caveat, the report that I've seen from Chantal does address a lot of the points that have been raised in the audit report, and actually I need to give kudos. The response to the audit report was very positive, despite it being a negative outcome. So you'll see the actions have been given quite short implementation dates. So I think that's a positive. As far as what we found positive from the report, it is a balanced report. There was robust policies and procedures in place. We did some sample testing of contracts, and found compliance with procurement thresholds. There was clear evidence that there was appropriate due diligence exercises undertaken, and we found sort of robust and robust governance and reporting mechanisms around procurement. The kind of key points for improvement, if that's capable to use that word, Chantal. The key finding was around contract management, in regards not having evidence of those processes operating. But I know that's one of the key actions in your report, so that dovetails nicely with that. There was other points around documentation of contract owners in the contracts register, ensuring completion of the project procurement initiation documents, completion of conflicts of interest assessments, and also evidencing the approval of contract extensions. But I think a lot of those points, whilst raised and correct at the time, I'm sure there's been progress there, Chantel, and like I say, your report seems to address a number of those.
Partial assurance. How did you feel about it? What have you done?
Obviously, it's disappointing, but completely understandable. It's a good opportunity for us to reflect and see where we need to move forward in the direction that we need to move forward with. We are exploring our options in terms of obtaining better control over those partial assurances. So yeah, that's all I've really got to say.
And I think the thing that registered most with me in all of that was your comment, Nick, about the positive reaction from the procurement team to the things you found needing improvement. Because for me, that the way we behave is as important as the detail on the paper, and the fact that it was taken as a means of a way to improving is a really, really good thing to hear. So thank you for that. We'll deal with you later. Anything else on the progress report from internal audit which we're asked to know? No. Okay, thanks.
And lots of detail. I think it's just worth mentioning for the committee and for the minutes that the risk management review this year has been positive after a couple of negative risk management reviews. So I think that also follows a lot of the trend of today's discussions in regards to direction of travel and improvement. So there's still actions in that report. And obviously Nathan again, and to give fair kudos to everybody, the response to that report was quick and swift. So both to yourself and Chris in regards, thanks for turning that around.
Thank you, Nick. Paul.
I was trying to understand what exactly the findings of the report were. We have a summary on page 5 of the actual report. Not sure what page it is in the document, where we're told that where there's partial assurance, there are actions agreed. We've got 2 low, 5 medium, and 1 high, but we don't actually have any indication of what those actions are. And I think that where you've got a report where there's only partial assurance, and even to a certain level where you've only got reasonable assurance as opposed to substantial assurance, where you've got high level actions indicated, I think we really ought to be able to see what those actions are as part of the report that comes to us, so that we can then and we should then have a report at some stage which tells us what progress has been made in actually completing those actions. Because what this tells us is that there is a problem in procurement and contract management. It doesn't tell us what that problem is. It doesn't tell us how it's going to be fixed. So when we next look at these reports, how are we going to know how effective the report is and the actions recommended are?
Nick?
No, of course, thank you. So I guess it's twofold. So I think what we could do to improve our papers is we can include a exec summary, which includes the management actions, implementation dates, and the kind of key issues that have been arising. Obviously, what we then do for your assurance is when we do the follow-up report, that will state the identified action from the original reviews and then what's been done to progress. But I do agree. I think we need to have that sort of clearer in the papers so we can include those summary reports for each report. And if it's a case, like you say, of the partials having a bit more detail and the positives just having a bit more of a brief summary, then we can do that. Obviously, what I can do, which you would like, I can share the report outside the committee so you've got the full detail. That would be beneficial.
Okay.
Or appropriate, of course.
Go on, Mike.
And just to add to that, in terms of the ongoing assurance of the committee in terms of response and implementation, the committee receive an update, I think, biannually at the moment on internal audit actions that have been agreed and the progress on their implementation. it may be that adjustments to that would be useful, such as potentially bringing out if there are any high actions still outstanding, even if they haven't reached implementation date, to highlight them. But that reporting is certainly in place.
I mean, as say, drawing on my experience elsewhere, I accept that the CPCA, despite your comments earlier, is not that mature an authority, and therefore you haven't got that many reports going back. But there needs to be an ongoing management review of what actions have been recommended, so they can actually be ticked off and put away, because otherwise you have a structure where you have an internal audit report, it highlights difficulties, everybody says, oh yes, we better do something about it, and then 3 or 4 years later nothing's happened.
Yeah, and I think the first time you were around the table, you made that point. I think you said I was neglectful, or some word that struck me at the time, that we weren't doing this at every meeting. But it was that point about we had to have a catalogue. So we did start at the beginning of this long journey, not trying to get into too much. We didn't want to be pouring over the detail in all the reports saying why. It was trying to get that right balance between visibility and not getting clogged up in the agendas. And that's something you never stop learning. We just need a bit more as we talk about that. Great. Anything else? No. And I thank you very much for emphasising the risk point as well in that. Okay. So we noted that. We now go on to the internal audit plan, which is the intention. I think it's not. I think actually, when I said all my stuff about not approving things, I think we do approve this audit. And this is a first taste, because the approval will come with the new committee in the new municipal year. But I know what we're looking for is a fair wind, so a couple of bits of early work can get on without waiting for the June meeting of the governance committee. With that fanfare, Nick.
Perfect, thank you. Excellent. So yes, the second paper's item 11, which is, as you allude to, not the full plan proposal, but just a early sight of the planning process. So, and we've held a initial discussion with Janice and Rob. So that was just to discuss the kind of timeframes for planning through to the May committee and getting the full plan there. I'm in the process, and Judith has kindly emailed me now, offering me a slot later today to discuss her thoughts on the audit plan. So I'll be meeting with each of the CMT members to discuss areas for inclusion. Following that meeting, the plan will be to bring a long list of options for the year to the exec team. The first instance to discuss priority and refine that. Also noting the risk management discussions today, we'll also reassess the risk management framework and current profile, just ensuring that our plan is risk-based. And then, of course, once that process has been completed, we'll bring that back to the committee in May for final sign-off and approval. Before I go into any other bits now, I think there's been quite a lot of discussion today around potential areas for audit inclusion, which I think has been really, really useful. So I think on top of that, I've got more notes from the meeting than I prepared for the meeting in regards to potential areas for the audit plan. So just the one decision point today, Chair and Committee, was just in regards noting the timeframes of the approval for the plan, and having had a sort of good year this year in regards to starting the plan early. Me, Janice and Rob discussed a couple of areas that we could potentially look at to doing Q1 or early Q1. One I think is very, 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 perfectly timed in regards to some work around the climate change strategy, as per the paper earlier. And also there was, it was suggested by Janice and Rob in regards to a review and declarations of interest. So the only sort of decision to make on that paper today was whether you're happy with those two areas to be commenced with, then pending obviously the full plan coming back to the May committee.
Okay.
Pause there.
Climate change and declarations of interest process, presumably.
Yes, yes.
Are we happy that those should be the early work for the internal auditors pending the first meeting in next year? Must have been that sandwiches and stuff in my teeth. In advance of final approval.
I'm happy with those two, but one thing we did discuss over lunch was Nick's suggestion that internal audit could look at the topics for which the deep dives are being allocated. And at the time when we had the discussion about deep dives, as well as hearing from management, we should hear from internal audit at the same time about what their view is about the processes going through and so on. So whether there is anything from the programme we've already identified for deep dives that needs to be brought forward into the first quarter, I don't know, but that's just a thought that Nick hasn't specifically mentioned, but I think he's alluded to.
So yeah, a bit later in my bullet points, I was going to bring that. So it was just off that discussion around the deep dives. What we've done in with other committees is dovetail with management in regards to them giving their update on the risk, but us also looking at those risk actions and controls and giving it an independent view at the same time, almost dovetailing on a presentation. So it kind of gives you some instant independent assurance over those key risks. So I mean, I guess it's a timing and a scheduling point for us to take forward, but I thought that would be worth discussing in the committee today, just whether that would be in your appetite.
Well, I sense that was the earlier tenor discussion, is to get that cross-reference to the review, whether it means you have to do the internal audit in order. I think that's less important than the principle that the internal audit position on that deep dive subject we're aware of, and either your intention to do it or not. Yes. You didn't look a bit.
Well, not about the intention to do it. I would prefer to have heard they have done it, what their view is on it.
But I mean that. I think I find that too difficult myself. I'll leave that till next year, because I think trying to matriculate internal audit work program and the deep dive, it sounds too many things.
My former professional life, it was something that I try to aim to do when it is possible to do it, because obviously the register is supposed to be a driver to the internal audit plan. And of course, the internal audit work should be looking at the controls within the register to mitigate the risk, to see how effective they're working. And I can see that being the basis about doing some internal work. So I don't think all the deep dives have to be subject to an internal audit review, because I think that's probably too much of a driver to the internal audit plan with the deep dive list. But I think there'd certainly be some within that list that could be done and included within the plan. But obviously I'd leave that up to the internal auditors to decide on a risk basis which ones they should be looking at. But again, I agree in effect, essence, with what you're saying, Graham, that it would be worthwhile to us as a committee to know that the risks are in place and working to go from a residual and to an inherent to a residual level. So yeah, I'd be happy.
Thank you, 7th Cavalry. I'm relieved. We did say, did we not earlier, that we were going to the first meeting of the new year, municipal year, would have a look at the deep dives plan. So could I ask then that internal audit and management just harmonise their thinking that in a way that would improve the read across between internal audit work and the sequencing of deep dives, on the understanding this is a best effort, bearing in mind all the other things that have to be dealt with. Are we happy with that?
Yeah. Can I also say, Jim, please, that looking at the list of indicative areas, one thing that's missing, probably because we've been lending rather than borrowing money, is there's nothing around treasury management. And I think treasury management, even if it's not in 25, 26, should certainly be a tick for future years so that it's not forgotten.
Just to highlight, that falls within the key financial systems control audit. Was treasury management this year that's just reported, or the year before?
Yeah. Was that enough, or did you get what you needed? Yeah, that was, you had agreement with that, but then timing and deep dives and all of that, we put into your melting. Yeah, okay. Yeah. And you've got some time, because I think the next meeting is not till June. Paul, sorry.
It's just a question. We have in the audit area plan, we've got for reviews that have already been taken place. We've got the level of assurance. We've got timing for future years. I'm a little bit confused by on page 13 or page 195. We have a number of ticks for 24-25. Which I presume means that those reports, but 24-25 has only got 4.5 weeks left, or 5 weeks left. So I'm just trying to understand, are we expecting that there will be 3 major being completed in the next few weeks?
The full risk assessment review being debriefed, that issued next week, and also the
Oh, can we put the mic on? Oh, sorry, because there's a we can
I can see the rings.
No.
Sorry.
It's just
If that was that. Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay. Of course. Okay. I'll revisit what I've just said there. So yes, so just in regards to those 3 reports, one's been finalised yesterday, and the other 2 will be out in draft with the authority in the next week. So all 3 of those will be finalised before the end of March, and obviously that would allow us to draft our head of audit opinion before the end of March.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I finished on a microphone malfunction, so sorry for that.
Thank you. So I think in summary, we're in a really good position to be able to conclude and sign the audit on Monday, which will be ahead of the 28th of February backstop date. And we are holding a slot on Monday afternoon to do so once Janice is back and can physically sign documents. So having taken the paper as read, I will jump to the good news story for you. So let's start with value for money and do it out of order. So section 3, page 217 of your pack, because I think this is probably the more interesting issue of our report for you. So in 22-23, we had 2 significant weakness areas that we reported on as other matters in our audit opinion for that year, which we signed in December last year. And those are set out in the table on our page 22, and they then de facto become a potential risk of significant weakness in 23-24. So on the basis that internal audit continue to conclude and qualify their head of internal audit opinion for that year, not just what Nick's given an update on, but having to go backwards in relation to weaknesses in the framework for governance, risk management and control, there were 4 areas that we pulled out that we linked to value for money. And because of that internal audit reporting, we have determined that that significant, or that risk of significant weakness did remain a significant weakness in that authority's underlying arrangements for the year. The second potential risk area is in relation to the best value notice and indeed the response to our significant weakness letter, the infamous 1st of June 22 letter that I sent to the chair of this committee. So whilst the best value notice was we could evidence action taken by the authority in response to our letter and the terminal progress against those actions through improvement
board reporting through to this committee, and indeed a letter that the chief executive sent to me with supporting evidence. And indeed, MHCLG noticed in their interim letter, I think it was December 23, that the authority should continue to drive improvement, not needed to improve. So I think the terminology of their letter is key. So I think my conclusion is, whilst there are still some weaknesses to address and some actions left to put in place in full and embed, there has been significant progress. And whilst those weaknesses may be there, I don't deem them to be significant weaknesses. And therefore, that element of other matter reporting in value for money, or the qualification, if you like, we have taken off in respect of 23-24. So I'll pause there for a moment, because that's kind of the big ticket news item linked to your good news journey, in case there's any questions on that. You have to give me time.
Significant moment, and the least Delphic the external auditor has ever been. This is good news, if I understood him correctly. Any questions?
It is indeed good news. Will you be writing to JP in a simple language such that it can be published on the web or wherever, that does indicate what your current view is? And will you be taking account of the continued progress that we've heard from officers and internal audit in this latest year, most recent years?
So I will reflect on that question, Graham, because our reporting is negative reporting for value for money, not positive reporting. But I do understand that a short letter to the chair would be probably worthwhile. So let me reflect on that. But our audit results report does say there are no, it doesn't become part of the opinion, which we'll come on to in a moment. So you can link it through, but clearly I understand why you might want a sentence that says that. In short, clearly we would continue to reflect on all the arrangements and progress that the authority makes, because we would be equally keen to understand any backward movement as well as forward movement. So that will be a continued area of focus into 24, 25 and then future years.
Thank you for that question, Graham, and for the answer. And I think it is appropriate, because it was exceedingly unusual to receive that letter to the chair of the audit committee all that time ago. Was it, which Jubilee was it? It was just before we went into a long weekend, I remember. So I think something that says in as best you get to layperson's terms, in a short note to me, in time for me to incorporate it in the report of this committee, and for the officers of this to decide how they wish to enjoy the good news, I would be very appropriate. So I hope your reflections are in that vein.
Understood.
Thank you.
So moving on to the other elements, so the financial statements. I think it is important to remember that under government legislation, we did disclaim the 22-23 financial accounts, which we did by the 13th of December backstop. So we were never going to be able to return to an unqualified audit opinion for this set of 23-24 set of accounts, because the pervasive nature of the opening balances and the comparative balance movements were too great to overcome in a short period of time. And indeed, the guidance that the Financial Reporting Council issued in their accessible guide says it should be over a 3 to 5 year time horizon. So whilst it is not an unqualified audit opinion, what the report does set out is that we have completed a significant element of and we are providing a significant level of assurance to you about those financial statements, albeit we haven't been able to build back full assurance about those opening balances and those comparative movements within them. So we can't provide you assurance on opening balances, comparative movements, which impact the balance sheet, the cash, the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, and the cash flow statement. And indeed, we cannot provide assurance over group financial statements in their entirety, which I'll come on to in a moment. So the key points to note, so materiality, 1.6 million, and reporting any audit differences above 80,000 to you today. In terms of a status update on page 204, we did have pensions valuation outstanding at the date we issued this report. I have now received assurances from KPMG as the auditor of Cambridgeshire Pension Fund. They noted an increase in asset values as a result of their audit, but the proportion of that relates to the combined authority was only 86,000. Therefore, I deem the estimate of the pension asset to be reasonable, and therefore we're not reporting that as an audit difference. So now we only have closing procedures to conclude between now and Monday afternoon. In terms of audit differences, we only have one unadjusted audit difference, which is an extrapolation, so we wouldn't necessarily expect Rob and the team to adjust for it. So it's based on a sample of other expenditure testing. There's a sample error of £10,000. When you extrapolate that across the whole population, it gives an error, a projected error of 180,000, overstating expenditure. The three samples that were in error, so two transactions related to the prior year expenditure and one transaction related to 24-25 expenditure. So you take those into account when looking at it. So we do believe it to be overstated, but at 180,000, it is clearly significantly below our 1.6 million materiality level. But we would need you as a committee to concur with management's view not to adjust for that within the financial statements. In terms of adjusted statements differences, we only have the three which are identified, in addition to the 7 that management they themselves identified and corrected. And I'm not going to say anything more on those because overly significant, I don't think. So overall, I would say a good set of draft financial statements for you as a committee to take assurance over. And therefore, on page 206, we have gained assurances across all areas of our audit risks that we had in our audit plan, with the exception of group reporting. So whilst we did request assurances from the component auditor as part of our planned programme of work, we did not receive them in a timeframe which allowed us to be able to perform our audit procedures over those and then the consolidation procedures. And therefore, we don't have audit assurance over group accounting in your financial statements. We have made 3 control recommendations on page 226, and I would say they are to enhance the control environment, not because it is entirely defective. And I think Rob's probably got an update on one of them that he can give to the committee. And lastly, we are only requesting standard representations as a result of the audit. So we have got all the audit documentation and evidence that we needed to be able to come to an audit opinion, with the exception of group component auditor documentation. So I did send through last night, having been able to conclude the audit opinion wording, which I think has been handed round to you. So it is a disclaimed audit opinion, as I said, and the value for money elements only have the one other matter now in relation to the internal audit, head of internal audit opinion, and the control weaknesses emanating from that. So thank you to Rob and the team for all their support. I think it is a significant step forward from where we were in December. It's clearly not all the way there yet, but that is going to be a time frame of the 3 to 5 years that the Financial Reporting Council set out, and we'll continue to work with Rob and the rest of, and Janice and the finance team, to work out the timetable over which we can appropriately rebuild those assurances over that time period.
Thank you, Bob. That's very, very, very clear and very helpful. Comments, please. Comments. You want to say anything before members speak?
Well, thank you, Mark, and your team for all your work on this. As he said, and the reason I was hopeful Mark would say roughly that when I handed him it first was that I was fairly confident he was going to say that very positive starting statement. So there were 3 areas that Mark touched on that I just wanted to update on. The first is the unadjusted differences, because you're being asked as a committee to approve it. And just to reiterate, The actual identified errors were just under £10,600, which is far below our triviality limit. We can't adjust the 180,000 because they're projected errors, not noted errors. There's nothing to adjust. So just to explain that for anyone who is not familiar with them. Secondly, on those 3 control recommendations that Mark mentioned, I'd give an update on all 3. The loan agreements, one of the ones that was identified has actually been found. Found is probably not the right term, or maybe it is in this case. And so actually the control that's already being put in place by legal colleagues is to ensure we have a much stronger record keeping practice. These loans are ones that were agreed in 2020. They're not a recent 22-23 agreement that has been misplaced in our electronic filing. As I say, the file has subsequently come to light, but we have much stronger controls in place to ensure those records in the future. And given it's a loan agreement, just to reassure the committee, it has been repaid in full by the person who was receiving, not person, entity that was receiving the loan. Second was around contract register, and again, given the other items on the agenda, I thought it'd be useful to touch briefly on that. The actions taken on that is we've got procurement training that was rolled out the whole organisation in February 2024. In August 2024, the Data Protection Officer wrote to all the senior members of staff to ask them to highlight any contracts they're aware of in their area to address the historic gaps. And finally, with the new Procurement Act coming live from the end of March, we have another round of procurement training for officers coming up in March. So there are several strands to our response to that to improve it going forward. Finally, on the journal controls, as Mark noted, they are recommendations, not a weakness. And I will respectfully push back on this particular one, as I did last time it was brought a couple of years ago. I've discussed with other constituent authority colleagues, and the shared view is that the value added by this, when you have a relatively small organisation, is not proportional to the amount of work required to do it. When there's only 8 people in your finance team, having one person check another person's work when they're all qualified finance is not considered to add significant value. But just an explanation of why you won't hear me coming back in a few months, unless you advise otherwise, to say. Finally, then, the literal red flag in the assurance report is around our group accounts. And I just wanted to give a bit more detail about that and express my frustration around it. As I think Mark inferred, the responses have been provided by the group auditors now, but not until, I believe, the 11th of February, despite having been available since the 24th of December. While the combined authority as shareholder is not responsible for appointing the auditors of its subsidiary companies, we will be having discussions with the directors we appoint to those boards about whether the subsidiaries continue with their current audit arrangement. Because if it weren't for that, we would be in a position where I think we'd be saying, apart from that which we can't control from prior years, it's a clean opinion. And again, just on the assurance point, those accounts have been published, are available on Companies House, and have been audited. There's no indication from this that anything is wrong with them. It's that EY have not had the opportunity by today's date to review that work for themselves.
Okay, thank you. Comments, questions, anybody? No? Okay, well, thank you. Thank you and your team. And hooray. Yes. Not hooray.
Just thinking for the minutes, do you need a positive statement saying we agree that that figure isn't adjusted?
Well, we're going to do that next, or we'll do it now.
No, that's the next item.
It's the next item. That can be the first, but thank you. Okay, good. So let's move on to, this is why you wanted to do it in this order, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go on to the draft accounts and the annual government statement. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you. Driven you off on accounting board. Yeah, so items 13.
Yeah,
draft accounts.
And Nathan was around because I asked him to speak to the previous item in case he was needed, so much appreciated that. I won't take much of the committee's time as we've just discussed the material elements of the accounts. The draft accounts are presented as part of your papers. ahead of signatures being given on Monday. Most significant change to it isn't the financial statements themselves. You'll be shocked to hear an accountant say. I think it's more covered in the annual governance statement, and that's the substantial improvements put in place throughout 23-24 via the improvement work stream, which has ultimately resulted, as you've heard, from MHCLG confirming that ministers are reassured of the authority's capacity to comply with its best value duty, and that the best value notice will not be reissued. You've heard that the impact that's had subsequently on our external auditors' view of our organisation, and that improvement in our position has been reflected in the annual governance statement, despite being after the reporting period, as the annual governance statement will be signed on Monday and should reflect key developments after the reporting date up to the date that's signed. The underlying financial statements have not changed fundamentally since those you saw in November. It's just the extra years, reflecting that the combined authority business didn't fundamentally change in that time. As I spoke about earlier, as franchising comes online over the next few years, I think there will be much more significant changes to the financial statement, and we will of course address those as they come to light. There are some large movements between the 22-23 balances and those of 23-24. Happy to go into them if the committee are interested, but I leave that up to them. In terms of decision making, I believe what we've just discussed is we need a positive decision on your concurrence with our view of not adjusting for the error noted, the approval of the draft accounts, delegation to the chair to sign them and approve any minor differences between now and Monday, and to note and provide any comments if you have them on the annual governance statement ahead of the mayor and the chief exec signing them on Monday.
Okay, so do we agree with the non-adjustment? Yes, we agree with that. The other points raised by Rob, do we have any questions, or are we content? And am I correct in observing on page 295 there were no exit payments this year? In this year?
Yes, that's correct.
Is that a first?
I imagine in our first year we might not have had any. It certainly wasn't the case last year.
Okay. Okay. Right. So are we content to move to the next item on the agenda with approval of the accounts and a permission for me to sign them off? Thank you. Okay. So it's Sue, item 14, information governance update. This is for us to receive the report on information governance activities in the past year. Sue.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. The report is a regular update for information governance. It just provides information on the freedom of information requests that we received over the last year, what the subject matter was, and the response time. So they're all in the table on the actual report. I've also given some information on data breaches that we've had over the last year, just to give you a flavour of what we've actually had coming through. We've had only one that actually had to be reported to the ICO, and they came back and said that we dealt with it satisfactorily. So the report is there. Any questions?
Thank you, Sue. I see no questions. Trends.
They're rising. FOIs are rising, definitely.
And so maybe, I'm sure we can infer it, but next time, when do we see this, in a year's time?
Yeah.
You could put in some words about trends.
Yeah.
But the rising of FOI, do you have any thoughts as to why this is?
I think it's the longer we're here and the more subjects and projects that we're actually doing, the more chance there is for people to question what we're doing. And I think that's what a lot of it is. It's just that we've been here a while now, and yeah, they just seem to be rising. And the depth of them is rising as well. The information that they're requesting is much more specific and quite detailed what they want.
And what about the workload implications? Because I remember I was in a place where one of my board colleagues said, this is the FOI was the most significant thing in our lifetime.
Yeah.
And I said, but there are 14 reasons why you don't have to answer. One of those reasons, I don't know whether it's 14, but is that many, is workload involved in unearthing the answer because it's disproportionate.
Yeah, but that has to be over 18 hours.
In that zone at all?
No, not generally. No. No, we're not.
Good. Because the more we can answer, the better. We've got some get-outs. Something we should avoid, and we've not used that.
We do use some of the exemptions. We generally are exempt in terms of commercial interest. So anything that's commercially sensitive, we don't release that sort of information. So that's anything that is specific to the company, that is their information. We don't release that. And personal information, obviously, we don't release either. So we do have some that we use, that we can use, but generally we do release the majority of the information that we're asked for.
Good. Thank you. Well, it's
okay.
Clear as ever.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And we'll see you in a year's time. Okay, we're speeding up now because it's only 20 past. Procurement update. Now I have to declare an interest, although I didn't at the beginning. Chantel and I have talked to each other. I gave her some thoughts, but that doesn't mean we can't criticise it. And I asked her to be bold and to tell us how she can improve. So with that introduction, would you talk to us?
Yep. I can talk to you. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. I'm pleased to present this update on the procurement behaviours following last September's report. This report provides comparative data from the years 23 and 24, highlighting changes in procurement processes and behaviours. The table within the paper outlines the various routes to market and the overall values associated against each process. Encouragingly, this data demonstrates a positive shift in how the organisation engages with the team, following policy and process improvements in late 2023. These changes have contributed to better compliance and efficiency. One key area of improvement is the significant decrease in the use of waivers, which is actually one of the corporate KPIs. This indicates that officers are engaging with procurement earlier in the process and adhering more closely to constitutional requirements. Additionally, there is a shift to e-tendering for all our requests for quotations, ensuring greater transparency and stronger audit trails. And while direct awards have increased, they remain in line with our contract procedure rules. In terms of complaints, nearly 80% of our tender processes receive a soft challenge, which is an internal request for review. None have ever progressed beyond the internal stage. Over the last 5 years, only 3 formal complaints have been lodged, with just 1 found to have sufficient grounds. But importantly, none of these have contributed to a breach in the regulations. Training remains a priority. The rollout of training is underway and consists of 4 tailored sessions aligned with specific directorates to ensure relevance and maximum benefit across the organisation. Improving contract management and oversight is another key focus. The team are currently exploring electronic systems that will provide greater oversight, improved data quality, and deeper insights into the contract life cycles from initiation through to completion. One of, I think, a key priority is, well, quite a few key priorities in the next year is standardizing contract management, improving oversight, strengthening the team, and enhancing data quality to assess our organization's procurement performance against best practices. The Procurement Act 2023, which goes live on Monday, not at the end of March, it represents a welcome shift, not just in procurement processes, but in ensuring that contract management is given the attention it deserves. Procurement's true value is realized when the full life cycle of contracts is effectively managed, and this will remain a key area of focus moving forward. And contract management was one of the high priorities in the internal audit report. So thank you. Welcome any questions.
Thank you, Chantal. Do you want to say anything next before I go to the floor? Okay. So, colleagues, remember the purpose of this, or when we commissioned this, was to get an insight into how the procurement activity takes place within the combined authority. So, with that thought in mind, comments, questions?
It was very positive, but I was hoping to hear from Nick as to whether or not it was going to meet his expectations in the internal audit. He's made various recommendations which we haven't seen, as Paul has said, and do these answer all the points that he has raised?
Of course. So yes, I mean, the key reason why it was a partial assurance was the lack of a contract management processes fundamentally. So all the other areas of non-compliance we found were pockets of non-compliance rather than fundamental weaknesses. So that contract management point aligns perfectly to us. Obviously, what we can do, we can dovetail on our action plan with what you're doing holistically, and we can obviously report back on that.
Thank you.
The table in 3.2 that shows 49 contracts awarded in 23 and 47 in 24, is that totality of contracts, 49 and 47? Because that doesn't seem a high number. So, but again, I'm not fully aware of what it does. And the other thing, obviously, the waiver, where there's just one waiver for £2 million, that seems an extraordinary sum of money. Can you just explain, I suppose, why a competitive process wasn't required or wasn't followed, without going into the details of what it was?
So yeah, that is for one specific area, and a competitive process was run. There were just issues in terms of extending, and that wasn't realized until too late. So to continue the service and delivery of it, because it's quite vital to our organization, is we had to allow it to go through this time, but there's a new procurement that has been undertaken for it going forward into future years.
You mentioned the Procurement Act. Are we going to see changes to the numbers against these 6 categories in table 3.2, direct awards to above threshold, because of the Procurement Act or not?
I think it's more on what the authority plans on doing for the coming years. I think some of those low numbers indicates a difficult time in the organisation, and not a lot was going on in terms of actually going out to procurement. There's a lot of fundings that go through, funding agreements. So I do suspect that's going to increase over the next year, and the number of competitions and tender processes that go out.
Just a quick one on the note you made, David, around the number of contracts. I think what that really is highlighting is the Combined Authority Acts, mostly in a commissioning way. And as Chantal mentioned, the vast majority of our spend through the statement of accounts is hundreds of millions of pounds. Most of it's through grants, which therefore don't go through a procurement process and therefore don't appear here. This is in no way suggesting that we've only spent £18 million over the last year. So just to provide a clarification.
Now, that puts a thought in my mind. When and how do we get any insight into grants? And do we need an should we have it? Should we have an understanding?
I think the answer should be yes. Hence my question about internal audit, about the whatever fund it was, and the 25 million. But obviously, a lot of the grants, Rob will probably have to explain this better than me, but I understood a lot of the grants are either where we get them handed by the government to hand out, or we make an application to central government as part of a pot and then get the money and hand it out. So presumably there's some grant information that goes back to central government about what we've done and what we've spent. So, but where that gets seen by or signed off, I've no idea. Obviously, it'll come to this committee.
So that's actually a really good point, but I'm not sure particularly. So there's two sides to our grant operations as an organisation. There's grants in, which are the ones we get from government, and grants out, which are when we agree with a constitutional authority that they're going to deliver something and we pay them. In terms of the grants in, they will come with individual conditions. There's an annual audit on AEB providers who are grant funded. And we have to return various bits of documentation to government to demonstrate that we have done what's required. There's a number of them that require a signature from the head of internal audit, and there is an entire work stream that sits alongside the internal audit plan of grant audits on an annual basis. And we could, I'm sure, adapt the internal audit update to include an update on that grant assurance. The other side of the grants out, partially that would be covered by individual programme assurance, where internal audit go and review the adult education schemes or the transport schemes. But it's certainly, I know Chantel's looked at, and I've looked at, what can we do replicating the contract register for a grant register. And that's work that I think we need to continue to develop through 25-26 to make sure we do have that single central record of both grants and contracts.
Okay. So, just going back to the Chantel's paper, do members feel it served its purpose in giving us an insight into how this activity is, both of nature, and would we like to see this as an annual report? Okay. And I would just, I should have told you this before. If you could, on the table in 3.2, if you could do totals, so David didn't have to add up how many contracts there were and how much money was spent, that would be helpful. And I wonder if there's a scope to have a similar report at the same time in a year's time that gives us that insight into grant activity along this model. Mm-hmm. Is that manageable?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so if we could put that in the work, we'd have them both in a year's sense. We have. Well done. Oh, sorry, you're not happy. Nick.
It's not a question for you. You'll be absolutely delighted. It just in regards to that grant point. So obviously we deliver that sign up of certain grants through the head of internal audit. So did you want some formal reporting on that at each committee or? Well,
no, this is just a little window of understanding activity. So I don't think this is a step-by-step thing. But if we model it similar to the way that Chantel has put out, to give us that sort of, where you involve, where you're involved, and how do you know you got your value for money out of it, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. I'll leave that to.
Yeah, we can work that out.
Go on. Excellent.
Sorry, I'm actually going to ask a question. Are you happy with the information that's in there, or do you want anything else included or have suggestions for any other information?
I think we're very, except for the totals. Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Chantel. And you followed my advice. Be bold, and you were. Thank you. Okay. The long haul is getting to an end. So this is number 16, which is, so trying to work what we're going to do. It's a consultation on the strengthening of the standards and conduct framework. And Rena's going to present it. Rena.
Okay, as you've already mentioned, this is actually a report from the monitoring officer who's not here, and you'll find proposed response to the government consultation regards standards and conduct framework for local authorities at Appendix A, and the contents of the report set out the purpose for this consultation. So the committee asked to decide whether to submit a response to the consultation, and if this is agreed, to approve the proposed response on behalf of the CPCA.
Full stop.
That's it.
And we are, some of us around this table are hot off experiencing some of these issues in procedural terms. Okay.
Right. Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Rena. Firstly, we had this discussion earlier on about what this committee does and doesn't do and approves, etc. Do we actually have the authority to submit a consultation response from this committee, or do we recommend something to the board? Would be the first question. Second point, and I'm quite happy to be outvoted personally, I'm not sure of the value of the combined authority be submitting a response, which I think would be taken to, or could be taken as a merged response from the constituent authorities, when I'm sure most constituent authorities will be submitting their own responses anyway. And thirdly, I have some grave concerns about the suggested response at Appendix A. Not least that it starts off by saying the response is from an elected member rather than from the authority. I find the comments were passed earlier on about exit payments. I find it difficult, or I'm not sure it's quite correct to say that the average number of complaints made by officers about elected members over an average 12-month period is nil, because I'm pretty sure there have been some in my time here. And because it's talking about average, we're 8 years in, so even if there was only one, the average would be 0.125. So I'm certainly not comfortable with the suggested response, if the agreement is that a response should be made.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, then we can't approve it. Let's take there was a consultation last month, early this month, SIPFA and the regulation of audit committees, and the CPCA gave a response on its own bat, and colleagues who they were given the link, and they could put in individual responses to the consultation. But it wasn't something that went to the board, and it wasn't something that the previous. So I agree, it's not for us to approve it. I think we could give her an opinion of like reservations about one area. But I'm on, it seems to be as it was with the consultation on the future of the audit office and that sort of thing. This is a question for the management of the CPCA, but I'm making this up as I go along. Help.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I think it's useful for us to make a response, as long as it's factually correct. I think, constituent authorities will make their own responses. I think that's a different thing. And, I think contributing to the database, the data set is useful, so we should respond.
I mean, we in the CPCA?
Yeah, that's CPCA.
So we support the idea of a response, and we have some reservations about what you come to us. Could you just remind us of things you were uncomfortable with?
I'd say, firstly, it says the response is from an elected member rather than the authority as a whole. The one that does concern me, because I just think I stand to be corrected, but I'm sure there have been complaints from officers about conduct of elected members over the 8 years of this that CPCA has been in existence, and this asks for an average over any 1 12-month period, and we've put nil, and I just would like that to be checked very, very closely.
Just let me understand the first bit, which is
the first the first
Yeah,
question.
yes. Please, you serve on. I think the tick is in the wrong
Wrong
place.
place, okay,
It should be under C, which is a combined authority.
Yeah.
And it needs to make clear, and its officers decide whether they need to steer this board. Okay. And we'd ask officers to re-look at the history to see if there had been any complaints in the period from officers about members formally registered. Make sure that is accurate.
We can check that.
Is there anything else that was in your mind there?
The other figures need to be checked as well because, okay, we're aware of what's gone on in the last 12 months. Complaints made by other elected members, but because of the way the question is worded, it says the average over a 12-month period. So actually, have we had that many complaints that we get 4 every 12 months over the 8 years of the combined authority? And I don't think we've had quite that many.
Yep, I will feed that back to Matt.
Anything else? And would we like the link to be sent to us so that if we wanted to do it as an individual elected member? Because I take Martin's point that the more feedback you bring, the more you can influence.
Some of the individual elected members have already received this direct from the ministry.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
So does that give you enough to go on?
Yes, I will let Matt know Monday.
Okay. So, I mean, we support the idea that the CPCA should give an answer.
Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
just to point out on the consultation, it closes next Wednesday. So we haven't got much time to get a response in. I wanted to make a point as well that we felt in our deliberations in the recent hearings that we had that the sanctions available to us were not fit for purpose. They didn't, as a deterrent to any form of behaviour really that we had. So having the consideration of stronger sanctions is something that we should definitely support. And yeah, I'm happy for us to put forward what is proposed.
And is that the view of us all about the need for sanctions with more bite? Martin, you've been living
Well,
this.
I agree with Chris. I mean, I was at the panel. I think we discussed that as a topic, wasn't it? That we felt we were somewhat limited. Although I think, on the other hand, you know, these members are elected members by residents. So it's a difficult place where a group of people decide to sanction people that have been elected by the population. So, you know, within the parameters of the way the sanctions operate, it's fine, but I think we have to be careful about how far one's willing to go on that.
We know it's a difficult process. Chris?
Can I just come back on that? Yeah, I do agree. And actually with MPs, there is the mechanism of the recall petition that if an MP does something that meets a certain threshold, it can go back to the electorate to say, do you want to kick this person out? And it happened in Peterborough. I don't know whether it needs to consider a similar mechanism for councillors if they reach a certain standard of bad behaviour that would need to be very clearly legislated for.
So,
I think that flags one of the concerns I have with this is that it talks about a serious breach of conduct, but it doesn't define how you define serious. And when you think about the recall arrangements, you need to have had a criminal prosecution or something that warrants a suspension from the House of Commons. And you can't just simply suspend people from the House of Commons unless there's something really serious. And there's no guidance here as to where you draw the line as to what is or is not serious. And I think it is rather difficult for a group of people sitting in a room to decide that they're going to terminate or withhold somebody's elected post. You know, you can publicize that, but it's not. There's a lack of democratic accountability if somebody who is democratically elected is then removed from that post by people who are not democratically elected.
okay, so that's the third point for the CPCA to consider about the support for sanctions with more bite, but they also need to be clear in explaining in the sanctions what words like serious mean. Is that enough?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, good. They're going to be busy in Whitehall, aren't they? So we've given a list of feedback. The audit committee isn't minded to put in their own response. Individual members who haven't already done so have the link and may put in an individual response by the deadline, which is the middle of next week. Okay.
Yeah.
Happy? Right. We're getting close now. Right. The annual report is item 7. Now this is best practice. It follows the format of previous reports. It is light on areas at the moment of audit opinions because we have a timing difference at getting the draft, which Anne and I think put most of this together, but all of it except a couple of paragraphs. So it's got to be developed a bit more before the deadline, which it'll go to the AGM. Is that right? So what I would be grateful for is feedback in the sense of tone and content. And with your agreement, I will polish it and send it in as my last bit of homework. Any comments? No? Okay, thank you very much indeed for that support, because it is important that it's able to go in with the fact that you're cited on it and have lent your support even by the silent procedure. Thank you. Right. How we do? It's 1:45. And now we've got item 18, which is the programme of work. We done that. You were asleep. Has anybody got any comments on the programme of work which we are going to bequeath to our successors? David.
I think we said earlier on in the meeting that we were going to do something about bus franchising.
Oh, is it not in?
I might be just overlooking.
It's currently in the cover report. There is a note that says that in light of the recent mail decision, officers will look to add that in at an appropriate time. So it's a case of just finding the right meeting for it.
Okay. Well, I think rather than look that they will for the new municipal year, that'd be lovely. Anything else? David.
Please, can we, obviously for the June meeting, I presume we're going to get the internal audit plan for next year. And also, are we going to get the financial statements and draft AGS for 4-5 in June, or will that be July? In June, so can those be added in, possible? And can I also make a plea, because it's that when you put the dates down, obviously like today's date, can we have the year at the end? It might seem odd, but it would be helpful. Thank you.
Nick, you
Yes, just off that point, actually, if we wanted to include the head of audit opinion and the internal audit plan, then that would sort of cover everything up on it. I don't know how much detail you wanted in there in regards to that, but obviously those are the 3 key documents.
So, when we're leaving, but some of it, hopefully, we'll go on the table again, get some continuity apart from David. But who knows? balancing act which I've never understood. So the next meeting is on June. And for those who are back in the trenches, there is a induction meeting on the 17th, which even though you think you know, it's always worth being in mind by approaching. Thank you. Thanks for your patience in a very long. Sorry.
Can we just put in the minutes Rob's comments over lunch and his thanks from officers for all your sterling work over the last 8 years? For a number of us, like David, knowing the difference between how we do things and why we do things has been really helpful to me in clarifying the role of this committee. And I think your leadership in that has been eminent. Also, I've always felt reassured when you said, I'm not an accountant, I leave other people to understand about the figures, and I concentrate a lot more on risk and governance and other aspects. It's helped me, being a non-accountant engineer sort of person, in dealing with this committee and in other places. So thank you, JP, for all your work over the last 8 years, and good luck in the future with your various applications.
Thank you very much. Okay. And are you happy? I can do that, but really. No, that's lovely. Thank you all, and God bless all who sail in it from now on. It is over. Thank you.